Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping into an ancient world, a place of towering stone pyramids, obsidian blades sharp as lightning, and punishments that make any modern discipline look like child's play. You're standing in the bustling marketplace of Tenochtitlan, where the scent of roasted maize, drifting incense, and an undercurrent of tension blend thickly in the air. In the radiant heart of the Aztec Empire, even the smallest mistake could cost you blood, so, before you get too immersed, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're truly enjoying what you're hearing. It helps me a great deal to keep sharing these strange and haunting tales with you. And drop a comment to let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is in your part of the world. I love seeing how far this little nighttime community can reach. Now then, dim the lights, crack open a window or turn on a fan for a gentle background hum, let your body relax and your breath settle. And let us slip quietly into tonight's journey, where the stone drums echoing from that distant pyramid are not just music, but a warning. You walk past rows of traders shouting gently about squash, tamales, feathers, and obsidian tools. Woven baskets overflow with cacao, red chilies, and delicate paper-thin tortillas. But something about the market feels unusually orderly. Almost too neat. Everyone stands just the right distance from each other. Transactions are precise. Smiles are fleeting and cautious. You soon realize this is not a matter of custom or culture, it's a matter of survival. One careless gesture, one accidental offense, stealing an avocado, insulting someone's maize stack, glancing the wrong way at someone higher ranked, and things could spiral quickly. Not into an argument. Into punishment. The kind you feel in your bones. Take, for example, minor theft. Stealing here wasn't simply about breaking the rules. In Aztec belief, it was a tear in the moral fabric of the universe. A disruption of sacred balance. You weren't just letting down your family or neighborhood, you were angering the gods. And the gods, well, they were nothing if not theatrical in their taste for justice. Let's say you're caught slipping a few cacao beans into your pouch. Seems harmless enough. But if it's your first offense, and you're young, poor, or especially pitiful, the authorities might spare your life, but not your dignity. You could be stripped of your clothing, tied to a wooden post in the center of the market, and made into a living spectacle. Passers-by would be invited to mock you, to hurl insults, and to throw whatever they had at hand, rotten fruit, sharp pebbles, sometimes even chili peppers. Raw ones. And if your skin had been scraped or cut beforehand, the sting of those chilies was something you would never forget. The pain wasn't just physical. It was meant to echo in your mind for years, and if your luck ran dry, or your crime seemed especially brazen, you might be dragged off for a more direct form of correction. Among the worst punishments ever recorded was boiling in chili water. Yes, not just boiling water, but water steeped with red-hot peppers until the very air burned to breathe. Imagine your body lowered into a bubbling cauldron that smelled like pain itself. Some scholars argue this was ceremonial, reserved for symbolic acts of atonement rather than everyday justice. Others believe it was rare but very real. Either way, the fear of it lingered in every whispered warning between parents and children. There were other methods, too, less lethal, but designed for long-lasting agony. You might be sentenced to sweep the streets of the city barefoot, day after day, for weeks or even months. It sounds tolerable until you understand that the streets of Tenochtitlan weren't smooth. They were embedded with sharp obsidian shards, scattered bones, broken ritual items, and the occasional lizard tail or chicken foot left behind from offerings. Every step drew blood. Every shift forward became a lesson, carved directly into the flesh of your feet, and the empire didn't stop at pain. It also specialized in humiliation. Shaving the head of a criminal was one way to strip away dignity in public. In Aztec culture, hair was not just fashion. It marked your age, your role, your honor, and especially your warrior status. A shaved head marked you as someone who had failed. It was a scar you wore in full view. Wherever you went, people didn't have to ask, they could see. You were the one who stole the squash. You were the reason others clutched their belongings tighter. Some punishments leaned more toward psychological torment. You might be locked in a tiny wooden cage, barely large enough to crouch in, your knees pulled to your chest for hours or days. The sun would beat down on the slats. Insects would find you. People would pass by and stare, children pointing, elders frowning. And your shame would thicken like smoke in the heat. You would beg for the chance to try again, to make it right. And yet the cage would remain shut. Sometimes, the punishment didn't touch your body at all. Instead, it destroyed the space you called home. Your house, however humble, might be dismantled stone by stone. Friends and neighbors would be forced to watch. Not to help, not to protest. Just to witness. Because knowing it could happen to them was part of the lesson. You would be left with nothing. No walls, no roof, no safety. And still, you remained in the city, a ghost among the living, too disgraced to be trusted and too visible to be ignored. One of the more unsettling forms of justice involved being handed over directly to the victim or their family. Imagine knocking on someone's door with a guard beside you. This thief is yours now. Do as you see fit. Some criminals were forced into labor, made to cook, clean, or tend fields. Others were tied up in a corner and treated worse than stray animals. And all of it was allowed. All of it was justice, the worst part. Your punishment didn't always escalate slowly. If you offended again, especially within a short time, the authorities had no patience. The first mistake brought shame. The second brought pain. The third? That could bring death. And Aztec executions weren't done in quiet, backroom fashion. They were theatrical, often religious. Some thieves, especially repeat offenders, were sacrificed in rituals. Their hearts removed, their blood spilled in offering to the gods who demanded balance. Some historians question whether this was common or exaggerated by later sources. But whether it happened often or not, the fear of it was enough to keep most hands from wandering. Now, picture yourself wandering back through the central square. You pass stall after stall. You hear the muted cries of hawkers, the measured shuffling of sandals on stone. You feel the collective weight of discipline. Every movement here is intentional. Coins are counted twice. Words are spoken carefully. Greetings are warm, but not too warm. It's not just good manners. It's survival. You catch sight of a man near a cloth merchant. His nose is misshapen, the bridge twisted oddly as if it had been broken and never healed properly. He doesn't bleed, but the scar is old and unmistakable. Maybe he cheated a buyer years ago. Maybe he was caught selling fake obsidian. Whatever the reason, his face is a quiet story. One look, and you know. Justice found him. The mark never faded. What might surprise you most is that the people here supported these punishments. To them, this wasn't cruelty, it was balance. To live in harmony with the divine required sacrifice, correction, and community discipline. When justice was carried out, the public didn't avert their eyes. They participated. They clapped, jeered, sometimes even wept. It was not just spectacle. It was civic duty. Everyone watched because everyone was invested. Still, not every person was treated the same. Nobles, children, priests, they often received alternate forms of punishment. Not necessarily easier, but shaped by different values and different roles. That, however, is a story for another night. For now, you curl up in a reed mat home on the edge of the city. The sounds of nighttime drift in. Somewhere, someone is screaming in the distance, not out of fear, but from the raw sting of punishment, learning in the most painful way what honesty really costs. You pull your cloak tight around you, heart pounding. grateful for the small mercy that you paid for your tamales earlier. Because in Tenochtitlan, forgetting something as small as that could be the last mistake you ever make. You wake with the first stirrings of morning in Tenochtitlan, though calling it waking might be a little too generous. In truth, sleep here never comes in full. It's a light, fractured thing. The city breathes through the night, never fully quieting, never truly still. Even at dawn, it continues its eternal hum, a living organism of stone, water, and movement. The sound that surrounds you is not quite music, but not quite noise either. It is a rhythm of many layers, a quiet tapestry woven from the soft drag of sandals against stone, the muffled thump of feet padding over rooftops, the squawks of turkeys bickering in their enclosures, and the coarse rattle of wooden stalls unfolding. Their joints groaning as vendors prepare for another long day under the rising sun. As light begins to slip across the horizon, it touches first the highest temples, painting their stepped faces with golden fire. Slowly, the light spills downward, crawling over mosaicked walls and colorful rooftops, eventually reaching the narrow canals that wind through the city like polished glass. There, the water catches the light, turning still surfaces into molten gold, reflecting the grandeur above in shimmering silence. In the distance, a flute begins to play. Its melody is soft, almost uncertain, curling gently through the air like mist. For a few fleeting moments, the world feels still. Balanced. Gentle, even, but then your eyes drift toward the field. Or rather, what used to be a field. What now lies there is no longer a place of life and growth, but a pitiful, defiant scrap of earth. It sits awkwardly at the edge of a noble's estate, a jagged, neglected rectangle of dry, cracked soil that seems to resist the idea of fertility. Not a single green shoot rises from its surface. No stalks of corn. No twisting vines. No curling tendrils or desperate roots. The earth here has long since surrendered to the heat. But it is not the deadness of the soil that troubles you most. It's the figure beside it. He is there again today, as he has been every day. He sits motionless beside the patch of dirt, a wooden hoe resting lifelessly at his side. A small gourd of water within arm's reach. He has no food, no shade, no protective cloth across his head to shield him from the rising sun. His tunic clings to his shoulders with sweat. His skin is red, peeling in places. He does not speak. He does not move. He merely exists beside the lifeless field, under the eyes of every person who walks by. He is alone, but he is never unobserved. You've stumbled across one of the more theatrical and symbolic punishments of the Aztec legal system. This is not punishment of the body, though suffering still lingers in every line of the man's frame. There is no blood, no physical violence. Instead, this is punishment of perception. Of public shame. For in the heart of Aztec society, laziness, particularly when tied to the sacred responsibility of growing food, was seen as something far worse than simple failure. It was a transgression against the divine order itself. A betrayal of the very rhythm of the universe. If someone's crops failed because of pests, weather, or unfortunate timing, there could be sympathy. After all, nature is fickle. But if those crops failed because the farmer neglected his duties, if he failed to plant, ignored the weeding, missed the sacred rituals tied to the cycle of growth, then that was no longer a misfortune. It became a deliberate offense. An act worthy of community response. And punishment, this field is no accident. It is a mock field, a known and carefully constructed tool of justice. It is not a place to farm. The soil is not expected to yield anything. It has long since lost its fertility. The man is not there to grow food. He is there to grow shame. Every minute spent among the cracks of that dead dirt is a silent message to the city: this man failed. He abandoned the corn gods. He broke faith with the cycles of the world. And now, under the full gaze of society, he tills the barren earth of his own disgrace. Historians have long debated the prevalence of this practice. Some suggest it may have been regional, while others argue it had broader use. But the archaeological record offers clues. These barren plots were deliberately maintained, season after season, long after they had ceased to serve any agricultural purpose. They were not allowed to fade or become overgrown. They were preserved. Held in place like scars. Kept visible. So that the lesson would remain clear, and it wasn't just farmers who were vulnerable to this kind of punishment. Any laborer who failed in his duties, canal dredgers, street sweepers, temple caretakers, could find themselves reassigned in this way. It was not correction through labor. It was correction through futility. The task given was deliberately meaningless. The job was not to produce. It was to be seen not producing. These punishments were performative. And the performance always had the same script: look upon this failure, and remember what happens when someone shirks their duty. The Aztec worldview revolved around cycles. Everything moved in circles: the sun, the seasons, the planting of corn, the beating of hearts. Corn, especially, was central to this rhythm. It was not merely food. It was sacred. To plant corn was to participate in the cosmic dance. To break that rhythm through neglect was to invite imbalance. Chaos. Decay. The punishment, therefore, had to reflect that sacred rhythm. It had to restore the broken circle. And so the man returns to his dead field. Day after day. Morning until dusk. A reminder in human form that balance must be paid for, but even this punishment had further consequences. In time, the empire might grow tired of your repeated failure. And when that happened, it would not imprison you. Instead, it might move you. Not as a prisoner, but as a burden. Relocation was not exile in the legal sense, but it functioned the same. You would be transferred to the outskirts, to stony, difficult terrain, where the land itself refused comfort. There, among hard soil and harder neighbors, you would be told to start again. Not because you were needed there, but because you were no longer wanted here, and if you had been born into noble blood, your failure would be seen as even more grotesque. Nobles who failed to maintain their lands, who allowed disorder or debt, might lose everything. Their status. Their estates. Their titles. In extreme cases, they would be stripped of rank and made to labor under those who once bowed to them. The reversal was complete. There was no appeal. Only the humbling weight of roles reversed. In some parts of the empire, the humiliation went further. A person who repeatedly failed their duties might be brought into the center of a public square and tethered, not with rope, but through reputation, to a wooden scaffold. Their failings were painted or carved for all to see: missed duties, neglected tasks, unpaid debts. People gathered to read the tally. They shook their heads. They pointed. They muttered. Some mocked. Others pitied. It was not unlike being publicly shamed on a message board, but the shame here was physical. It lived in space. And it could not be erased. Yet there was, if barely, a path toward redemption. Aztec law left a sliver of space for those who sought to make things right. A man who showed genuine remorse, who labored without complaint, who volunteered for hard or humiliating tasks, cleaning latrines, repairing temple steps, carrying heavy loads for the infirm, might one day be welcomed back into good standing. But it was not a quick process. Forgiveness came slowly. Trust slower still. And though a man might rise again in the eyes of the gods, the people would not forget so easily. Even the gods were not quick to forgive. Tlaloc, god of rain, watched the fields with both mercy and judgment. Those who neglected the sacred cycles did so at their own peril. Prayers alone could not bring back the rain. Devotion had to be earned. If the gods deemed the offense to be rooted in laziness rather than chance, then no offering would be enough. The skies would remain dry. The land would remain hard. The punishment would ripple outward, affecting not just the offender, but the community. As you walk slowly through the neighborhood, the weight of this ethic becomes clear. You see it in the motion of the people. There is no wasted gesture. No idle hand. Farmers work with a reverence that resembles prayer. They speak to their crops in low, intimate tones. Children chase off hungry birds with quick feet and shouted warnings. Elder women murmur blessings as they gather herbs. Idleness is not just discouraged. It is banished. Near one of the canals, you notice another man seated quietly beneath a crumbling arch. His clothes are stained. His palms are raw. He avoids your gaze. You hear a whisper from someone nearby. He used to be a teacher, they say. A respected one. But he missed too many rituals. Not from malice. Just neglect. But the empire does not distinguish between the two. There is a cold, stern logic behind it all. A harsh but consistent system. Everyone knows what is expected. Everyone sees what happens when expectations are not met, and as you step beneath the thick canopy of a tamarind tree, its shade wrapping around you like a curtain, the day's heat begins to gather once more. It presses against your skin, not just as warmth, but as pressure. A weight. The weight of vigilance. The weight of being seen, because here, in this radiant empire where the gods walk alongside men, where sunlight reveals more than it hides, laziness is not a passing flaw, it is a crime. A betrayal of time itself, a sin against the sacred calendar. The day draws on, and the heat thickens above the city like a lid settling over a clay pot, sealing in every scent and sound. The air becomes heavy, dense enough to press against your skin. Each breath carries a weight, and every step feels just a little more deliberate. As you walk, you pass another dense cluster of open-air market stalls, where the noise of bargaining women and calling vendors blurs into a rhythmic background hum. The smell of roasted corn husks rises in the air, sweet and slightly charred, mingling with the smoky scent of wood fires and the subtle bite of crushed chilies. It is the smell of the city's appetite. Near a shaded corner, steam lifts gently from tamales nestled in hand-woven baskets. Their wrappings shine with trapped heat, glistening like polished leaves. Beside them, someone crouches low before a clay brazier, carefully turning a tray of insects over red-orange coals, each movement practiced and precise. The roasting produces a scent that is nutty, earthy, and strangely inviting, like sun-warmed soil after rain, but even as the aroma curls through the plaza and calls to your senses, your hunger is careful. It does not leap. It watches. You glance over your shoulder, not with fear exactly, but with something older. Something learned. A kind of instinctual awareness. Here, even hunger is not free. Here, even desire is subject to conditions. And you remember what the elders whispered the night before. Voices low but sharp, if you drink the wrong thing, in the wrong place, while wearing the wrong sandals, in front of the wrong person, under the wrong phase of the moon, then your misstep might not end with regret. It might end with something far more permanent. Especially if the drink in question is alcohol. The Aztecs held a complex relationship with drunkenness, one shaped by layers of ritual, reverence, and regulation. It was not the alcohol itself that drew disapproval. Pulque, a thick, opaque, slightly sour beverage fermented from the sap of the maguey plant, was more than tolerated. It was venerated. It was offered to the gods, consumed in sacred rites, and even prescribed as medicine to those deemed in need, elderly people seeking warmth, mothers recovering from birth, priests preparing for spiritual communion. Pulque had roots that ran deep. It was part of the divine pattern. So no, the substance itself was not forbidden. The concern lay in the when, the how, and the who miscalculate those details. Drink too much, at the wrong hour, in the wrong company, and the punishment could be swift and merciless. You might lose your hair. You might lose your public standing. And in the most serious cases, you could lose your life. Imagine yourself as a young man, perhaps 20 years of age, or no more than 25. You have responsibilities at home. You are still learning your role in the household, still considered in training. One night, you sneak away after your duties, slipping into the warmth of a friend's hut. The harvest was good. Spirits are high. Laughter swells. Pulque is passed from hand to hand. At first, the sips are cautious. Then, more generous. Your voice rises with the mood. Maybe a song escapes you. Maybe a joke lands too loud. Maybe your cup tips. Outside, someone hears. A neighbor, a rival, an official. The celebration stops. The crime begins. You are not accused of drinking. You are accused of disrespecting the structure that holds this society together. Because to be drunk in the Aztec world was to abandon your place in the cosmos. For the young and unmarried, whose minds and habits were still being shaped, the rules were the most rigid. For them, drunkenness was not indulgence. It was betrayal. Even one unauthorized incident could lead to execution. Not hypothetical. Not metaphorical. Execution was often carried out by strangulation. Not a quick or private act, but a slow, visible punishment meant to imprint itself on all who watched. Some scholars believe such punishments were rare, meant to scare rather than to be routinely applied. But the fear they created was real enough. Real enough to keep most young hands steady and most cups untouched. For older citizens, those with families, experience, or religious roles, the boundaries shifted slightly. Certain ceremonial festivals permitted moderate intoxication. In those moments, drinking was not only allowed, it was spiritually encouraged. The right kind of drunkenness, timed correctly, could thin the barrier between mortal and divine. It could draw the drinker closer to the gods. But permission was never casual. If you took your drink outside the temple, if you overindulged, if your steps wobbled in the wrong direction, the law still waited. Often, the punishment began with the shaving of your head. Not a smooth or symmetrical cut, but a punishment haircut. Rough. Jagged. Delivered publicly. The hair was taken unevenly to humiliate, to mark, to remind. Hair, especially for warriors and nobles, represented pride, maturity, and honor. To have it hacked away in front of others was to be unmade in the eyes of your peers. And then came the garments. You might be forced into clothes stitched with symbols of disgrace, patterns that shouted your shame. Or you might be given humiliating tasks, cleaning the stone courtyards near the temples, hauling filth from the latrines, sweeping endlessly under the eyes of silent witnesses. This period often lasted 20 days, a full moon cycle. During that time, you were not simply punished. You were made into a lesson. Strangers would point. Children might laugh. Adults might look away. Or worse, they might speak your new name, one given not in affection, but in mockery. Names like Stumbles at Dawn or Drunken Monkey. The laughter would fade. The nickname would not. And for the noble class, the fall could be steeper. One account speaks of a minor noble caught in a drunken stupor beyond the sacred boundaries of a ritual feast. He was not executed. But his punishment may have been harsher. He was stripped of his land and title. Dressed in rough cloth meant for peasants, he was marched to the steps of the temple. There, on his knees, atop fresh cactus thorns, he offered a public apology to the high priest. A man once bowed to, now bowed low, and bled. Even with these harsh treatments, the drink itself remained sacred. Pulque had a divine origin. According to myth, it was the gift of Mayahul, goddess of the maguey. She was seen as its mother and its guardian. To drink pulque properly was to honor her. To misuse it was to insult her gift. And such insults did not go unnoticed. There was even a festival called Tokli, Two-Rabbit Day, devoted to ritual drinking. On this day, people honored the Sensen Tatoktin, 400 rabbit gods of intoxication, each representing a unique facet of drunken behavior: joy, sorrow, foolishness, brilliance, and everything in between. The symbolism was rich. The limits were precise. No underage drinkers. No unmarried participants. No drinking games. The ceremony was structured to reflect a balance between surrender and control. Still, not everyone followed the rules. In the darker corners of the city, unauthorized pulque dens existed, modest huts hidden behind reed fences, places where laughter was hushed and shadows stretched long. For some, drinking outside the empire's gaze was an act of defiance. A quiet rebellion. But the consequences were rarely heroic. One story tells of a fisherman from a coastal settlement who brought pulque to a village feast without approval. He declared the drink holy. Claimed he had blessed it himself. The crowd joined him at first. Then came the judgment. He was bound to a post in the plaza, not beaten, not killed, but exposed. For 3 days, he stood in the sun while villagers passed him and spat pulque onto his skin. No pain. Only shame. The message was absorbed in silence, carved deep by ritual, deeper than any wound. Now, as twilight bleeds into the city, and the canals begin to mirror stars, you notice the stillness that guides every movement. There is a rhythm here. Every lifted cup, every shared sip, is choreographed. These are not rules kept by force. They are upheld by memory. By belief. By the long breath of myth still carried in the lungs of the people. You pass a shrine to Mayahil. Flowers rest gently at its base. A cup of pulque sits beside them, untouched, soft white foam still swirling at its surface. It shines in the moonlight like a word unspoken. You do not touch it. You step around it with care, you walk on. Your thirst lingers, but your hands stay empty, because in this place, in this empire that calls celebration sacred, to get drunk is to gamble with your very place in the world. You continue your stroll through the quieting streets of Tenochtitlan, the moonlight gently brushing the polished volcanic stones beneath your feet. Each step carries you farther into the hush of a city slowly exhaling. The paving stones, once radiating the harsh heat of the sun, have now cooled, sighing away the memory of the day. Your sandals make a soft, deliberate rhythm, barely audible against the settling stillness. Somewhere in the distance, a dog gives a single bark, sharp, solitary, then nothing more. The city absorbs the sound and returns to silence. The air has taken on a calm clarity, the kind that only arrives when a great metropolis begins to sleep. Thin curls of smoke drift lazily from the last of the evening fires. Their scent faint but lingering, a blend of toasted maize, burnt wood, and something slightly sweet. Market stalls, once bustling and chaotic, have folded shut like the wings of resting birds. Colorful banners flutter gently, no longer commanding attention, but simply existing. Behind closed reed doors, families murmur their final words of the day. You feel the rhythm of the city shift, as if it is preparing to dream. Most of Tenochtitlan has begun to settle in for the night. Most of it. But not all. At the edge of a quiet neighborhood, where the torchlight pools in soft amber patches along a crossroads, you notice a crowd. It is not the kind that celebrates or argues. No laughter. No trading of gossip. This is a still crowd. Heavy. Solemn. Their silence is not casual, but charged, like the thick air before a storm. It coats your skin like fine volcanic ash, clinging in places you didn't expect. Instinctively, your breath slows. The back of your neck tightens. In the center of the gathering stand a man and a woman, each bound by thick fiber cords around their wrists. The cords are not tight enough to cut the skin, but firm enough to keep them still. The two figures tremble, not in cold, but in the sharp awareness of what is unfolding around them. A ring of witnesses watches, unblinking. And beside the accused stands an elder, robed simply, his hands gripping a long cord dyed deep crimson. He holds it evenly, one end in each hand, the length of it swaying gently in the night air. His face is unreadable. Neither angry nor sorrowful. Just quiet. It is then you understand what this is. You have come upon an adultery trial. Among the Aztecs, infidelity was not simply a breach of trust between two people. It was far greater. Marriage was not a private matter. It was a sacred binding, a thread interwoven with ancestry, lineage, ritual, and divine order. To betray a spouse was to betray the extended web of life, the family that gave you breath, the ancestors who watched from the land of the dead, and the gods who shaped the world. Such a rupture demanded response. And not in secret. It had to be witnessed. It had to be corrected. The balance, once disturbed, needed restoring. The punishments varied, depending on status, circumstance, and whether remorse was offered. But in cases where guilt was undeniable, especially when the betrayal was witnessed or confessed without hesitation, the sentence could be swift. Death was not unusual. One method, marked by ceremony rather than chaos, involved a slow and deliberate strangulation. The cloth used was always significant, often dyed red or black, chosen to reflect the weight of the offense. The condemned would kneel, sometimes on mats, sometimes directly on the stone, and before family, neighbors, and sometimes priests, their final breath would be taken. No violence. No blood. Just a tightening of the cloth, a slow suffocation, and the silence that followed. Some historians continue to debate the prevalence of such executions. Perhaps they were more common among the nobility, where scandal could echo through temples and courtrooms. Perhaps they were used across all classes when the betrayal was particularly severe. Either way, what cannot be questioned is the weight such stories carried. The fear they inspired. The discipline they upheld. Death was one form of correction, but it was not the only one. There were quieter punishments too, more enduring in their shame. One of the most chilling involved public stoning. But not the frenzied action of an angry crowd. This was orderly. Structured. The guilty party, often bound at the wrists and ankles, would be placed at the base of a temple staircase. Those chosen to cast the stones were often elders or citizens with personal understanding of betrayal. No words were spoken. Each stone was offered in silence. Not as an act of fury, but as a ritual of consequence. Every impact a testimony. Every bruise a sentence, but not all offenses ended in death. There were circumstances, rare, but real, under which the guilty could be spared. A timely confession might reduce the penalty. If the individual showed sincere remorse, or if a respected priest or elder advocated for mercy, the sentence might shift toward shame rather than loss of life. A shaved head. A branded chest. A tattooed forehead. These were signs not just of punishment, but of a new identity. One marked forever by transgression. Sometimes, the condemned were exiled. Far from the sacred heart of Tenochtitlan. They would be cast into distant villages or labor camps. The salt flats were a common destination. Silent, dry, and lonely. There, among white stone and wind, they would live out their years in obscurity. One tale speaks of a man sent to such a place who was ordered to never speak in public again. He obeyed. For 20 years, his voice remained silent. A living ghost, breathing but unheard. Women, especially, bore a unique weight under these laws. Aztec expectations of womanhood were tightly bound to ideas of purity, service, and maternal honor. An unfaithful woman did not fall alone. She dragged with her the reputation of her household, her lineage, her father. In some cases, the state did not need to act. The father himself was given the right to deliver punishment. This might be done privately, with a blade of obsidian, in a dim courtyard. No witnesses. Only the whisper of prayers and the red wash of justice. To modern sensibilities, these laws might seem cruel, even barbaric. But to the Aztec mind, they were necessary. Marriage was not a convenience. It was cosmic structure. The gods who oversaw fertility and family, such as Tonatiuhtli and Tonatiuhtli, were believed to take great interest in human unions. A marriage broken by betrayal was a threat not only to social harmony, but to divine order. It was a tear in the world's fabric. It had to be stitched closed. Publicly. Precisely, and yet, as harsh as it seems, the Aztecs did not completely close the door on redemption. It was narrow. Difficult. But possible. A repentant individual could approach the temple with offerings. Not simple gifts, but sacrifices of value and spirit. Rich textiles, feathers from rare birds, cacao beans pressed from distant groves. Sometimes, their own blood, drawn through ritual cuts, was given in exchange for purification. If the priests were moved by the display of contrition, a path to forgiveness might be opened. It was long. Days of fasting. Cold baths in sacred springs. Ceremonial silence. And, finally, a re-entry into society under the cautious gaze of the elders. In one riverside village, an unusual penance was recorded. Adulterers were made to sleep on beds of cold maize husks. No blanket. No fire. Only the wet bite of river-chilled fibers and open air. If they endured for 7 nights without illness, it was believed the gods had accepted their remorse. If not, the sickness itself was read as divine refusal. Of course, what counted as adultery could be complicated. The empire allowed concubinage, particularly for nobles and warriors. But these arrangements required formal recognition. Without proper ceremony, even a union permitted in spirit could become scandal in practice. One misplaced step. One unblessed union. And punishment could follow swiftly. One story preserved in temple records describes a man punished not for physical betrayal, but for dreams. He confessed to repeated visions involving another man's wife. The dreams disturbed him. He feared they were more than just imagination. The elders agreed. His thoughts were declared dangerous. Actions in the making. For purification, he received 20 lashes from a maguey-spined whip, and a rub-down with a cleansing mixture made from frog venom. Painful. Humbling. But effective, at least in the eyes of the priests. Now, you take a step back from the crowd, your body moving instinctively, seeking a quieter stretch of street. The murmurs of the crowd fade behind you, but the image lingers. The crimson cord. How it shimmered in the torchlight, soft and fluid. How it was used to do something so final. What lingers even more than the act is its memory, in this society. Such events are not buried. They are not forgotten. They are remembered. Passed down. Carved into stories. Children grow up hearing them. Names become more than names. They become parables. The baker who died in the square. The seamstress who vanished into exile. These stories live in the city's blood. You pass a mural painted onto the side of a home. Though weathered by time, the message remains vivid. A jaguar and an eagle chase one another, locked in a circle of motion. Beneath them kneels a human figure, wrapped in scarlet cloth, head bowed. It is not just art. It is warning. It is memory. It is instruction. A breeze stirs. It carries the scent of crushed blossoms, roasted grain, and the cool tang of stone. Your limbs feel heavier now, not from weariness, but from knowing. From understanding. Somewhere nearby, a drum begins to beat. Soft. Measured. Unseen. A heartbeat echoing a ritual you cannot see, and in that silence, you feel it fully. In this city, in this empire, love was not just affection. It was law. It was structure. It was sacred. To betray it was to invite judgment, not just from the living, but from the gods themselves. To tear at the threads of unity was to wound the world. And that wound had to be closed. One stitch. One breath. One trial at a time. Morning returns to the city in layers. First comes a faint, barely perceptible blush blooming slowly behind the dark outlines of the volcanoes. It lingers on the horizon like a whispered promise. Then, as if answering some ancient cue, the delicate notes of clay flutes begin to rise, thin and spiraling, drifting through the cooling mist like music from the gods themselves. Bird wings flutter up from the canals, disturbed by the stirring of life, and their movement rustles the reeds with soft, rhythmic flaps. Tenochtitlan is waking, you stretch on your reed mat, feeling every inch of stiffness clinging to your spine. Sleep has left your limbs heavy, but not unwilling. You are curious. You are drawn. A low murmur, like distant thunder made of voices, swells and rolls from the direction of the central marketplace. It pulls at you, not loudly, but insistently. You rise, still wrapped in the haze of dawn, and begin to shuffle toward the sound. As you near the bustling square, you spot the source of the commotion. The crowd forms a wide semicircle, silent but focused. At its center, two men kneel on woven mats of reed and fiber, their heads hung low in shame. One clutches a clay bowl in trembling fingers. Its edges are jagged, broken, as though snapped in haste or fury. The other man sobs quietly, and tears have smeared the pale gray dust on his face, creating streaks down his cheeks like scars of disgrace. Before them stands an official, tall and rigid, his feathered headdress catching the sunlight in sharp flashes. His voice carries as he reads the charges aloud: the offense. Cheating customers in the market. A betrayal of trust. At first glance, the crime might seem small. Perhaps they sold lower-grade beans as if they were the highest quality. Or maybe they used clever trick weights, carved stones made to seem heavier than they truly were. To the modern mind, such a deception might feel petty, something to be scolded and forgotten. But here, in the Aztec world, the market was not merely a place of exchange. It was a living, breathing pillar of the empire's structure. It was sacred, ordered, cosmic. To commit fraud within this space was to do more than steal. It was to erode the very harmony of society, and so the punishment? It would not be a mere reprimand. They were not handing out warning slips or quiet reprimands behind closed doors. One of the most well-recorded responses to such offenses was forced humiliation, physical, immediate, unforgettable. Often, the guilty vendor would have his head shaved right there in front of the market crowd. A symbol of shame, of lost honor. But in more serious cases, the punishment became more theatrical. The vendor might be stripped down to nothing but a simple loincloth and paraded in a slow circle through the square. As he passed each stall, he would be made to stop, bow, and confess his misdeeds to every merchant he had deceived. His words would be rehearsed and repeated until the memory of his shame was stitched into the minds of all who watched, but sometimes, the crimes were more severe. Perhaps a nobleman, greedy and arrogant, had sold false turquoise to the priests. Or a butcher had dared to pass off dog meat as sacred venison. In such cases, the response grew darker, more symbolic. One punishment involved using sharp reeds to pierce and split the offender's nostrils. It was said to symbolize an opening, a painful invitation for truth to finally enter the body, or for the poison of lies to be let out. It was public. It was ritualized. And it left a mark no one could hide. There is still debate among scholars about the frequency of such mutilation. Some believe it was used only for repeat offenders, or in cases that deeply affected the city's spiritual order. Others argue it was more common than we like to imagine. Either way, the result was unforgettable. The face became a signpost. Everyone who looked at you knew what you had done. Now imagine the market itself. Neatly arranged rows of colorful stalls. Traders offering maize, amaranth, cacao, dyed cloth, obsidian knives, bundles of dried fish, cakes of salt, and the occasional cage of live iguanas. Order was essential. Prices were fixed. Weights and scales were checked regularly. And behavior was monitored not just by temple officials, but by a specific class of men whose job was to observe and report. These were the professional witnesses. They wandered with quiet eyes, trained ears, and long memories. They were human surveillance, a spiritual security system powered by duty and tradition. If a vendor denied wrongdoing, a trial would be held right in the square. The evidence would be presented. Witnesses would speak. And if the tribunal found the accused guilty, the punishment would unfold there, before the same community that had once trusted him. It was justice, and it was a lesson, visible, audible, unforgettable. You pause beside one of these stalls now. It is draped in red cloth, heavy with baskets of dried chili peppers. The merchant behind it meets your eyes for only a second. He is missing his left ear. You do not ask. You already know. Here is a lesser-known detail: some guilty traders were made to wear signs. Literal signs. Wooden plaques tied around their necks, with their crimes painted in bold, visible letters. I lied about my grain. I stole from a widow. I mixed salt with chalk. The offender would walk the main causeways like this, from the heart of the city all the way to its edge and back again. The path would take them past temples, noble homes, children's schools. They were a moving warning, a walking parable. In the most serious cases, punishment took on a destructive edge. If a merchant's deception had caused illness or invoked spiritual danger, such as selling spoiled food or cursed charms, their stall might be burned. Not simply closed or confiscated. Burned to ash in the square. The fire would be public. The smoldering remains left in place. It was a declaration. A reminder. This was where trust had died. Other times, the punishment turned toward reparation. If a trader was caught hoarding during a time of famine, or inflating prices on essential goods, the empire could and did seize their inventory. It would then be redistributed among the poor. A kind of ancient, forced charity. Punishment turned into redistribution. The scales rebalanced, in goods rather than blood. Still, not every story ended in ruin. A merchant who confessed freely, before being caught, could sometimes be spared the worst. While public shame was inevitable, the more brutal physical punishments might be avoided. They would still be paraded. Still mocked. But perhaps allowed to remain in business if they gave something up: a treasured cloak, a daughter's dowry, an offering to the temple. It was a symbolic purchase of forgiveness, a trade for trust. You find yourself wondering how many acts of fraud escaped unnoticed. But then you remember, this was a society built on watchfulness. Everyone observed everyone. Every act had witnesses. And above all, the gods were believed to be watching too, always. You pass a small shrine tucked between two older buildings. It is dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the deity of learning, of wind, of the sacred economy of fair trade. Small offerings sit at the base of the shrine, bundles of feathers, carved hands the size of a baby's palm. These hands symbolize honesty in trade. They are tiny sculptures of integrity, left in devotion to a god who demanded balance, and that is when you understand why the punishments were so severe, so theatrical, so intentionally memorable. The market was never just a place to buy and sell. It was a mirror of the universe. Every exchange echoed divine patterns: planting and harvest, light and shadow, rising and falling. Giving and receiving were acts of sacred rhythm. To deceive in that space was to insult more than a customer. It was to offend the entire structure of order. So the rebalancing had to be just as powerful. Sometimes it came as a wooden sign. Sometimes it arrived as a scar. One story in a faded codex tells of a woman who sold fake medicinal herbs. She swore they cured infertility. Instead, her customers fell ill. 3 women suffered. The seller was not sentenced to death, but to silence. For an entire year, she was forbidden from speaking or selling. She wore a red shawl as a mark of guilt and could only gesture to communicate. After the year passed, she was allowed back into society, but forbidden to deal in herbs again. She became a basket weaver. Her new trade was quiet. As you drift back toward the calmer edge of the square, the sun begins to descend behind the tall silhouettes of temple towers. The light deepens into amber. The feathers in the merchants' headdresses flicker like embers. Children gather loose goods and help their parents fold fabric, count coins, wrap up the day. The crowd thins. No one lingers. Further down the path, the same man with the torn nostrils kneels beside a basin of water. He dips his face into it slowly, avoiding all eyes, washing away the dust, but not the memory. You learn something in that moment. Something simple and strange, that in this world, honesty was more than a virtue, it was a survival strategy. The light has begun to dim, sliding softly behind the tall silhouettes of the temple roofs as you wander down a narrower, quieter street. The day's brightness fades, and in its place comes a gentle, golden hush that paints the clay walls in honey and shadow. The breeze shifts direction, carrying with it the faint scent of crushed marigold petals and wisps of burned copal resin, the fragrance curling around you like incense drifting from some invisible altar. Here, in this quieter part of the city, you pass doorways draped with woven mats, where families sit close together, speaking in low, reverent tones, their conversations barely rising above a murmur. Children, barefoot and drowsy, are gently coaxed indoors with clay bowls of steaming pozole, the savory broth swirling with maize and pork, still bubbling from the hearth. But there is one house, simple, almost easy to overlook, that draws your attention. You stop in front of it, not because it is grand or unusual, but because of something subtler. The small clay hearth near the door still glows faintly, though the fire is dying. The threshold bears the blackened fingerprints of soot, long streaks of smoke that stain the wall just above the entrance. And at the doorstep, seated motionless as stone, is an elderly woman with hair like coiled silver thread. Her gaze is distant. Her lips, too, are notable, not twisted in grief. Not frozen in anger, but in something else entirely. Absence. A void where expression should be. Her mouth is burned. Not gruesomely, not in a way that disfigures her entirely, but visibly and permanently. The skin is drawn tight across her lips, puckered and glossy, like old leather touched too long by flame. As if once, years ago, she leaned too close to something she should not have. As if her lips had once kissed a secret that proved far too hot to hold. A passerby, voice hushed, offers a quiet explanation. She was once the wife of a nobleman, a woman of status and respect. But she had a habit. A small one, at first. She whispered too often. She passed stories from one ear to another, little tales and private truths. One day, one of those whispers landed in the wrong place. Now, she does not speak above a murmur. She rarely speaks at all. Because here in Tenochtitlan, even the softest word could ignite something far worse than anger. Even words could burn you, gossip. Lies. Slander. Insults. Each taken with the same seriousness as theft or violence. Speech, after all, was not simply social in the eyes of the Aztec world. It was sacred. To speak falsely or with malice was to tamper with the fundamental balance of things. The Aztecs believed words held power, real, elemental power. Words could transform, deceive, heal, or destroy. A false accusation had the power to unravel a life. A cruel jest could fracture an alliance or start a feud between families. So, the laws responded accordingly. And they didn't just patrol public slander shouted in the streets. Even a whispered phrase behind closed doors could bring you before the court, if the wrong ears were nearby to hear and repeat it. One of the most disturbing punishments recorded for malicious or dangerous speech was the ritual burning of the lips. And yes, it was literal. The methods varied. Sometimes chili was used, smeared raw and hot across the skin. In other cases, ashes were taken from incense burned for the gods and pressed into the mouth. There were also accounts of firebrands, sticks heated in flame, touched briefly but sharply to the lips. The point was not to disfigure entirely. It was to mark. It was to leave behind a sensation so unforgettable that it would echo every time the speaker formed a word afterward. Not just pain. Memory. Scholars still argue over how widespread this practice really was. Some claim it was rare, symbolic more than routine. Others argue that it happened often enough to shape behavior, to instill fear and caution across generations. Either way, it survives in codices, murals, and stories passed down by those who remembered. One version tells of a child who insulted a priest during a lesson, laughing at a ritual he did not understand. The punishment was swift. 2 elders held him in place while a pinch of burning incense ash was dabbed across his lips. It did not scar. But it stung. And for years after, the boy is said to have spoken only when spoken to. Adults were not spared either. Nobles who lied in court, or who spread dangerous political rumors, were subject to public humiliation. Some were tattooed on or near the mouth with marks of deceit. These were not random. They were stylized, small, twisted speech lines, or crooked patterns meant to resemble a distorted tongue. Others had to wear sharp maguey thorns tied around their mouths with fiber cord, so that any movement of the jaw would draw blood. It was a silent punishment, one that grew more painful the more the speaker tried to talk. A reminder that sometimes, the wisest choice is to remain quiet. There is a more mysterious tale, recorded only in fragments, of a well-known singer-poet. A man who performed at noble banquets and composed verses layered with double meaning. His metaphors were clever. Too clever. In one of his final performances, he praised the gods with a verse that many understood as veiled criticism of the empire. Some laughed. Others frowned. He was beloved by commoners, but distrusted by temple officials. After that night, he vanished for 3 days. When he returned, his voice was gone. Not stolen, not magically taken, but willingly silenced. He wore a woven cloth across his mouth, stitched with 2 jade beads that shimmered faintly in the sun. He never sang again. Some say it was his punishment. Others say it was his choice, an act of self-discipline, a penance offered to the gods. You continue walking, the houses now pressed more tightly together, courtyards opening into shared spaces. In one, a father scolds his son in a voice that is both stern and sorrowful. The child's eyes are lowered, his head bowed. In the father's hand is a tiny bundle of dried chili pods, bundled with thread. You recognize the gesture immediately. It is an old disciplinary method. The chilies are not for eating. They will be burned in a small clay pot. The smoke funneled toward the child's face as a ritual correction for lying. The heat will sting. His eyes will water. His throat will tighten. He will not forget. Not because of pain, but because of what the moment means. This method, still echoed in rural practices many centuries later, was not about punishment for punishment's sake. It was about instilling memory. A story the body would remember every time the tongue was tempted by falsehood, because in Aztec belief, memory was survival. To lie, to twist the truth, to wound with words, was to invite cosmic imbalance. The gods listened. Especially Tezcatlipoca, the god of night, of smoke and mirrors, of temptation and trickery. He was not just a punisher. He was a tester. He lured the liar in, then used their own words as the knife. People feared him. His presence was invoked in court not just to seek justice, but to expose hidden deceit, and silence, too, could be treacherous. To say nothing when something needed to be said, to allow an injustice to pass in silence, could be treated as equally damaging. Words were power. But so was their absence. Timing mattered. So did intention. As a result, the courts developed creative and symbolic punishments. A woman who gossiped too much might be made to carry a basket filled with tiny ears crafted from clay. These ears, disturbingly lifelike, would be strung around her neck as she walked through the marketplace for several days. A mobile sculpture of consequence. A soldier who lied might have his tongue painted black and be made to carry verbal messages barefoot across scorching earth, the heat blistering his soles as a second lesson. One lie could turn the body into a canvas of regret, yet, there was also a way back. A speaker who repented, who truly wished to make amends, could seek forgiveness through the temple. The path was not easy. It required ritual bathing, fasting, the slicing of the tongue with a shard of obsidian to draw a single drop of blood. That drop would be offered to the gods. A small but potent symbol. The pain was not punishment, but tribute. A way to buy back balance with truth. Eventually, you arrive at the edge of the neighborhood, where the city softens and the air feels cooler. A mural greets you, spread across the curved wall of a shrine. It depicts a great serpent with feathers, the divine Quetzalcoatl, his coils wrapping gently around the mouth of a kneeling figure. The serpent's eyes are serene. His face is split between a smile and a warning. Below, smaller figures kneel, their tongues painted with stars or flames, their expressions caught somewhere between awe and pain. It is not a threat. It is a teaching. Words matter. They ripple outward. They reach the gods, the sun slips finally behind the distant rooftops. The final glow fades into a soft blue hush. You find a bench, old, smooth with use, and settle there as the street grows quiet. The noise of the day has vanished. No shouting. No laughter that spills too far. Only the occasional hum of a flute or the low tone of a whisper drifting from an open window, and sitting there, with the quiet folding itself around you, you think a simple thought, perhaps, in this city, silence is not emptiness at all, perhaps it is reverence. Night falls with the softness of a woven cloak, settling over Tenochtitlan like a lullaby spoken in hushed tones. The city grows quiet beneath its weight, the din of the day dissolving into stillness. Lamps dim, doorways close, and voices lower as though the darkness itself listens. In the vast sky above, stars begin to gather, not in twinkling delight, but in sharp, flickering bursts that resemble flint struck clean against obsidian. These are not gentle lights. They are sparks of memory, reminders of the fire at the heart of creation, scattered across a deepening blue that seems to stretch endlessly in every direction. Overhead, the silhouettes of temple pyramids rise like great stone teeth against the heavens. Their angular outlines rigid and unmoving. They cast long, deliberate shadows across the plaza below, extending like black rivers that divide the light. These structures are more than monuments. They are sentinels, watching as the city shifts into its nocturnal rhythm. They hold the weight of ritual, of sacrifice, of ancient vows not yet broken. Beneath their gaze, you stand now at the edge of the nobles' district, the ground changes beneath your feet. The stone-paved roads here are smoother, the wear of footsteps centuries old. The houses around you rise higher than those in the merchant quarters, their facades less cluttered but more commanding. Their walls, made of cut stone and finished clay, breathe a silence that feels deliberate. There is a different weight in the air here, a different tempo. Even the birds seem aware. Tucked into rooftop gardens and hidden courtyards, they sing not in bursts of joy, but in measured, hesitant notes. Their melodies are subdued, cautious, as though they too understand that within these walls, decorum matters more than noise. It might be comforting to imagine that those born into luxury in Tenochtitlan drifted above fear and consequence. That the opulence of their embroidered cloaks, their elaborate jewelry, their polished speech, insulated them from judgment. But this was not that kind of world. In the Aztec Empire, the highest places were also the most exposed. Elevation was never a hiding place. It was a stage. Wealth did not equal impunity. It brought attention, and with it, scrutiny. The higher the perch, the more visible the fall. And when nobles fell, they did not fall quietly. This reality was expressed through a structure of noble-specific punishments. These were not punishments measured only by the nature of the crime, but by the social expectations attached to the person who committed it. For a commoner, stealing a handful of maize might result in the loss of a finger or a public beating. It was swift, visible, and final. But for a noble, whose education, duty, and honor were supposed to be exemplary, the consequences were designed to reach deeper. Titles could be revoked with a single decree. Family lands, once secure for generations, could be stripped away. Entire lineages could be cast into disgrace. Punishment did not only fall upon the guilty. It spread like ink through cloth, touching children, siblings, servants, even the memory of the household name. Consider the image of a former court advisor. Once praised in the palace, once gifted with feathered sandals and rich cacao, he is now forced to scrub the public latrines. Not with tools, but with bare hands. The same hands that once accepted tribute and penned official edicts now smear mud across stone in silence. This reversal was no accident. It was crafted to be seen. It was theater with a moral. You pass a house now that once pulsed with authority. Its design still hints at former wealth, but its energy is absent. The walls sag in sections. There are scratch marks along the doorframe. Not the marks of time or weather, but of deliberate defacement. The family glyphs once carved proudly above the entrance have been scraped away, not just to erase identity, but to reject it. As if to say, what was once honored is now dangerous to remember. A thin smear of dried red clay has been daubed across the threshold. It is subtle, but its message is clear. This home is not abandoned. It is condemned. No feet pass through the door. No names are spoken aloud. The story, known only in whispers, speaks of a man named Lord Akalua. He was not a great noble, but a clever one. His position was modest, but his ambitions were not. He was trusted with the collection of tribute maize, intended for sacred offerings at the temples. But he diverted a portion for himself, not because he was starving, not because he faced need, but because he desired indulgence. He hosted lavish feasts behind closed walls. He drank what was reserved for gods. He laughed when he thought no one could hear. For a time, his charm protected him. His eloquence silenced suspicion. But the city listens, even when it pretends not to. And when the truth finally emerged, the response was not gentle. The emperor, guardian of cosmic order and earthly power, did not grant him death. That would have been mercy. Instead, he had Lord Akalua's head shaved in the main plaza, before a silent crowd. His humiliation was made complete when his family's garments, embroidered with symbols of past glory, were thrown into a ceremonial fire. The flames consumed the fabric, but also burned away the privileges that had once set them apart. The family's lands were taken. Their servants dismissed. Their name, once spoken with pride, was only whispered in warning. As for Akalua himself, he was sent not to prison, but to the marshes. There, in the knee-deep waters of Lake Texcoco, he joined the reed-cutting crews. No rank. No ceremony. Just labor. The same noble feet that once walked the palace stones now bled from hidden thorns in the lakebed. He worked until he died. There was no funeral. No elegy. No altar. Only the silence of the reeds, and this was not unusual. This was expected. It was the system functioning as it should. In the Aztec worldview, privilege and accountability were bound together. Nobles were not merely elevated. They were living examples. Their lives were supposed to reflect discipline, restraint, wisdom, and honor. When they failed to uphold that contract, their downfall was made public. It served a purpose. The spectacle of their shame became a lesson for the entire city. The fall of one reminded thousands of the rules they lived by. Among the most extreme punishments was ritual flaying. This was not violence for its own sake. It was symbolic, religious, and precise. It was reserved for the gravest betrayals, acts like treason, temple theft, or sustained cruelty toward the vulnerable. The punishment began with death, but it did not end there. After execution, the skin of the guilty was removed by temple priests. This act, as shocking as it may seem now, was filled with spiritual meaning. The skin was then worn by a ritual dancer who moved through the city, performing the guilt of the one who had sinned. The community did not turn away. They watched. They remembered. This was not vengeance. It was transformation. To modern eyes, this practice may appear as nothing more than barbarism. But within the Aztec moral framework, it represented something more. The flayed skin symbolized ego stripped away. It represented truth laid bare. It suggested that rebirth might only come after the self had been broken completely. Some scholars believe these rituals were not always punishments, but sometimes acts of penance. In rare cases, nobles chose them. They submitted, hoping that in death, they might cleanse their name. The records are incomplete. The interpretations vary. But the ritual is known. It is recorded. And it mattered. For lesser offenses, the punishment was still meaningful. A noble might be made to serve a commoner. Not as a matter of debt, but as a reminder of hierarchy's fragility. He might carry produce through the marketplace. He might sweep the floor of a humble dwelling. He might prepare food for someone he once passed without notice. Each act reversed the direction of power. Each task reshaped the soul. Some crimes called for visual marks. If a noble neglected spiritual duties, or harmed someone within his household, his residence could be painted with broad bands of red or black. These were not aesthetic choices. They were warnings. Public reminders of private failures. Visitors would grow quiet. Stories would grow louder. The shame stayed longer than the paint. You see one of these legacies now. A tall man crosses the plaza. His clothing is clean but simple. He walks with purpose, holding a staff not for support, but for identity. He is a tranquilo, a scribe who records official matters. But once, he may have been something more. Perhaps he once wore a jaguar cloak. Perhaps he once commanded soldiers. The staff he now carries is painted with black slashes. It is not decoration. It is confession. It tells everyone what he cannot say aloud. He writes now because he is no longer trusted to lead. The precise crime is forgotten by most. But the punishment, like the staff, remains visible. Many forget that there were special courts for nobles alone. These were not arenas of forgiveness. They were intense chambers where spiritual law met earthly rule. Priests judged alongside elders. The standard was higher. The scrutiny sharper. Yet even in such courts, there was space for humility. A noble who confessed voluntarily might find a gentler path. His punishment could become purification. One story tells of a high priest's son who stole war spoils for himself. When discovered, he did not argue. He shaved his head. He fasted. He cut his tongue with obsidian. He gave his riches to the temple. He surrendered his title. But he was allowed to remain in the city. In time, he became a teacher. He instructed young boys in sacred calendar chants. His voice, once misused, became a tool for memory. His punishment became peace, and this is the essence of Aztec justice. Punishment was not only to repay or to shame. It was to restore harmony. To align the soul, the city, and the stars. Whether through service, through pain, or through silence, the goal was healing. The wound was acknowledged. The thread was knotted again. You stopped now at the base of a stairway carved with ancient symbols, serpent heads, jaguar paws, endless spirals. The noble district rises above you, majestic and quiet. Its beauty is touched by shadow, its silence filled with echoes. It feels both alive and haunted, like a song that once played loudly but now hums just beneath the breath. The wind moves. It lifts the corner of your cloak and brushes your cheek with a chill that is not cold, but thoughtful. You close your eyes. You wonder what it meant to be born into such weight. To wake every day knowing that honor was not a gift, but a test. That power did not protect, but exposed. That one misstep could silence the voices of your children, and their children, and every name they might have carried, and just before you turn to go, the moonlight shifts. It reveals a wall, once proud, now worn smooth by weather and time. Its glyphs are barely visible. The name it bore is all but gone. But its punishment remains. Not in screams. Not in stories. But in a silence that still speaks. It is nearly midnight now, and the city exhales more softly than before, like a great stone beast resting between dreams, its breath slow and even, its thoughts drifting in the hush of stars. The vibrant clamor of the day has faded, and in its place lingers a patient quiet, the kind that sinks into the stones, into the canals, into the reeds trembling at the water's edge. You find yourself moving once again, your steps light and careful, drawn toward the residential quarters, not the lofty homes of nobles this time, not the polished avenues with shadowed glyphs and judgment hanging in the air, but the humbler districts, where families live close together in tightly woven networks of homes, gardens, and shared hearths. These are the streets where daytime laughter echoes the loudest and communal songs drift across rooftops, but now all is hushed. That warmth has dimmed with the sun, replaced by the soft hiss of night insects and the occasional, measured echo of footsteps on compacted clay. You pause by one small home, its walls made of reed and plaster, low and round like a resting turtle. Smoke still curls from its chimney in thin, steady ribbons, proof that the hearth remains lit, that the house is still awake. Through the slats of the woven reed wall, your eyes catch a flickering glimpse of firelight and motion. A mother kneels near the coals, a bowl of glowing embers held carefully in her hands. Across from her, a child, no more than 6 years old, kneels with his head slightly bowed. He sniffles, lips quivering, but does not cry. He is still. Beside him, on a small clay dish, rests a single dried chili pod, deep red and wrinkled, and then you understand. You are witnessing something ancient. Something sacred. A rite of discipline, carried not with anger but with intention. The Aztecs did not approach child-rearing casually or carelessly. Raising a child was more than a personal task. It was a sacred charge, a duty watched over by the gods with the same intensity they directed toward temple rites and celestial alignments. A disobedient or lazy child did not merely reflect on the family. They risked spiritual imbalance, a disturbance in the flow of ma'at and harmony, so discipline was careful. Thoughtful. Designed not to harm, but to shape, it began early and followed a path as structured as any priestly chant. For the youngest children, punishment was largely symbolic, a swift tap on the wrist to disrupt misbehavior, or a scolding steeped in metaphor and story. But as children grew, around the age of 6 or 7, more intense methods entered their world. These rituals were not meant to cause trauma. They were meant to imprint, to leave memories in the body that would grow alongside virtue. One of the most well-known practices, and often misunderstood, was the chili smoke punishment. Parents would place dried chili peppers onto the glowing embers of a cooking fire. As the chilies burned, they released a sharp, stinging vapor that filled the air and bit at the eyes and throat. The child would be held gently near the smoke, not forced, but directed, and the vapor would sting and cause coughing, tears, and discomfort. The entire experience lasted only a few minutes. Long enough to leave an impression, but short enough not to harm. It was a lesson inscribed not with fists, but with breath. And afterward, the child was often wrapped in a shawl, offered a story, and reminded why the punishment had occurred. Whether this practice was widespread or localized remains debated. Some scholars believe it was common in the Central Highlands, especially in Tenochtitlan. Others suggest it may have been a custom specific to priestly or elite lineages. But it appears in codices across multiple regions, always depicted in the same way, with the child knelt, the parent composed, the act surrounded by ritual, and chili smoke was just the beginning. Another traditional method involved gentle binding. A child who defied commands or ignored tasks might have their wrists or ankles loosely tied with rope before bedtime. The knots were not tight. They caused no bruising. But they disrupted comfort. They mirrored the internal disorder with a mild external inconvenience. In the morning, the bindings were removed, often with a blessing or a new lesson. The message was simple: to sleep freely, one must act rightly. For older children, those nearing the edge of adulthood, even stronger rituals existed. A father might gently prick the skin of a misbehaving son with a cactus spine, not out of anger, but during a ceremony. As he did, he would offer prayers to Tezcatlipoca, the god of darkness, judgment, and truth. The prayer might ask for laziness to be banished, for lies to be burned away. It was a physical act of purification, linking pain with reflection, with transformation. There were even entire schools dedicated to correction. A boy who could not be managed at home, who defied rules or shirked labor, might be sent early to the Telpakali, the school where boys trained for war and civic duty. There he would rise before dawn, carry water, chop wood, run with heavy loads, and sleep on hard mats. He would learn the rhythms of service and struggle, the pride of completing hard tasks. It was not punishment meant to humiliate. It was a pathway to reshaping a crooked sapling into a strong pillar. There is one detail many overlook. Aztec parents were not merely responsible for correcting their children at home. They were also obligated to acknowledge their children's faults before the gods. Once a year, during particular festivals, families were encouraged to confess the missteps of their children. This might happen at the temple steps, during a fire ceremony, or at a communal gathering. The family would then offer gifts, bundles of maize, carved toys, or labor, in penance. It was not about shaming. It was about accountability, about weaving private virtue into public fabric. You pass by another home. This one is more modest, its exterior painted with thick earth tones, symbols scratched into the plaster. Above the door, a hummingbird carving marks the family's devotion to Huitzilopochtli, god of war and sun. Outside, a teenage boy stands silently, holding a heavy sack filled with sand. His arms tremble slightly under the weight. His father watches, offering no command, no rebuke. The lesson is already unfolding. The punishment is not cruel. It is patient. It is exhausting, not violent. To carry weight is to remember what burdens feel like. To sweat is to be shaped. Labor was one of the most common tools for guiding troubled youth. A boy who ignored his duties might be sent to collect firewood from distant hills, or to haul water from icy canals. Some were made to stand waist-deep in cold water for hours, holding reeds above their heads. These punishments were hard, yes, but they always came with limits. They were not endless. They were not meant to break. They were designed to restore balance through repetition, through bodily memory, and always, there was love beneath the fire. Aztec parents did not punish out of spite. They followed ritual. They wept with their children. They offered small tamales afterward, or bowls of chocolate. Codices often depict these quiet moments after correction, a mother placing food in her child's hand, a father touching the shaved crown of a newly disciplined son. In this world, punishment was not the opposite of love. It was love, wrapped in ash, in smoke, in incense and prayer. There is one lesser-known tradition that speaks to this beautifully. At birth, when a child was first introduced to the world, the naming ceremony included a whispered warning. The priest would bend close to the baby's ear and speak blessings, but also cautions. "May you grow strong and wise," he might say. "But beware of lies. Beware of sloth." These murmured phrases were believed to enter the child's spirit, to plant roots before memory even formed. Discipline, in the Aztec world, did not begin with punishment. It began with sound. With intention. With vibration in the bones. You pause beneath a low tree now, its branches hung with small ribbons and trinkets. Toys made of corn husk, smooth stones painted with prayers, feathers tied with string. This is a sacred place. A tree dedicated to Tenantzin, the mother goddess. Families come here to pray for strength. For patience. For forgiveness. Some hang ribbons to atone for moments they raised their voices too quickly. Others ask for guidance when a child's path seems crooked. And here, in the stillness, a truth rises soft and unshakable. The Aztecs did not discipline children because they lacked warmth. They disciplined because they believed every child carried a sacred thread. That thread, thin and glowing, ran from the child to the gods. And when it frayed, through selfishness, or lies, or defiance, it threatened not just the child's future, but the balance of all things. So every lesson, every puff of chilly smoke, every burden carried in prayer whispered, was meant to pull that thread straight again. To make it whole, you close your eyes beneath the tree, feeling the cool breath of night against your face. Above, stars glimmer like beads caught in the branches. Somewhere nearby, a child giggles in a dream. Elsewhere, another sniffles softly after a bedtime scolding. And still, life moves forward. Slowly. Steadily, you breathe in, and catch the faint, familiar trace of chilly smoke in the wind, because here in Tenochtitlan, even the smallest mistakes were met with fire. Not to destroy, but to shape. The quiet of the night is deceptive, appearing peaceful on the surface, like a still pond at twilight, but beneath it pulses a deeper, older tension. You move carefully now, following the worn stone paths that wind through the city's sleeping heart. Your steps lead you toward the very center of Tenochtitlan, toward the most sacred ground of all, the sacred precinct, where the twin temples of Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli rise together like twin lungs of stone, drawing in silence and exhaling awe. They do not simply stand. They loom, immense and unmoving, carved from volcanic breath and ancient fire. You have wandered through marketplaces bustling with trade, through family homes humming with stories, and through courts echoing with judgment. But now, with each step, you feel yourself crossing a boundary, not just physical, but spiritual. You have entered the sacred. And here, every breath, every footfall, every glance carries weight. These temples are more than houses of worship. They are the spine of the empire, the center from which all life radiates. They govern not only prayer and ceremony, but time itself, war, justice, agriculture, and the cycles of birth and death. To live in this city is to live beneath their shadow. And here, within these temple walls, even the smallest mistake is magnified into something cosmic. A misstep becomes a message. A careless act becomes a curse. Because in this place, violating a temple rule is not seen as a simple error in judgment. It is not brushed aside with apology or rectified through private remorse. Here, such a mistake is understood as a rent in the fabric of the universe. It is not just a social misdeed, it is a spiritual breach, and it must be addressed not by forgiveness, but by ritual. Imagine, now, that you are a humble laborer. You have been tasked with sweeping the temple steps at dawn, a duty both honorable and precise. The instructions given to you are strict. You must never spit on the stones, never speak above a whisper, never cast your shadow across the image of a god. You are to begin each shift by stepping forward with your left foot, a gesture meant to signal humility and order. But one morning, perhaps still heavy with sleep, perhaps distracted by the ache in your joints, you falter. You drop your woven basket of sweeping tools. It tumbles across the steps and comes to rest near the base of a sacred idol. In your panic, you reach for it and brush the stone with your bare hand. Without the proper prayer, without permission, in that moment, you have crossed the line. What you intended as a correction becomes a violation. You are no longer a servant performing his task. You are now a soul in danger. For those who defile holy ground, whether in defiance or accident, consequences come swiftly. There is no leniency for confusion. In the worst of cases, temple guards, ever watchful, seize the offender at once. You are dragged not to a courtroom, but to the subterranean halls of judgment beneath the temple itself. There are no appeals. There is no chance to plead your case. Your fate rests in the hands of priests, men who speak not for themselves, but on behalf of gods. There is ongoing debate among scholars today about the severity of punishment in every case. Some argue that only deliberate offenses resulted in death. Others suggest that even accidental transgressions could warrant ritual execution, depending on the moment, the season, the will of the stars. But what is universally agreed upon is that once a law of the temple was broken, the consequences reached beyond the body. The soul itself became imperiled. In some cases, the punishment was ritual bloodletting. A symbolic cleansing. The offender would be handed a shard of obsidian, so sharp it sliced with barely a touch. They would be instructed to pierce their own tongue, or their ears, or the soft flesh of their thighs. The blood gathered from these wounds was not discarded. It was sacred, a form of language. It would be offered to the altar, sometimes drawn in spirals, sometimes in sacred glyphs. Pain was not the goal. The goal was purification. Your blood became your apology, spoken in red, but not every violation could be washed away. If your crime was more grievous, if you had stepped over a holy object, urinated within temple bounds, spoken during a moment of divine silence, you might be brought before a high priest in ceremonial ash. Your body would be cleansed and dressed in white robes, your face marked with symbols of humility. There would be no appeal. In some cases, the execution would take place immediately. Your blood would feed the earth. And your death would not occur in shadow, but beneath the open sky, because these rituals were not hidden. They were often tied to festivals, transformed into sacred cautionary tales. Your final moments might be sung aloud, your story chanted before dancers and drummers, your name carried into the next season not as a man, but as a warning. Your body might be buried beneath the very steps you once swept. A silent lesson embedded in the stone. Your children might live their lives beneath the shadow of your mistake. Indeed, there are stories of entire families punished for the offense of one. One tells of a merchant who sought profit through deceit, blending an impure resin into incense sold for sacred rites. When discovered, his punishment was not only execution, but obliteration. His home was destroyed. His lineage was marked. His descendants were barred from entering temple service. For generations, his name became a caution. Yet, not every path led to death. There were rituals of atonement for those who truly repented. Some were ordered to remain within the temple precinct for 40 days, a full cycle of purification. They fasted, sleeping on stone, clothed in garments of maguey fiber that scratched and itched, reminders of their humility. Each day, they offered prayers, burned herbs, and waited. If they completed the penance, a priest would perform a symbolic rebirth, bathing the offender, anointing them with crushed flowers and oils, and bestowing a new name. Few endured the ordeal. Fewer still were granted absolution. There were more subtle punishments as well. In rare cases, the voice itself was taken. A vow of silence would be imposed, barring the offender from speaking within temple grounds, or during rituals, for an entire calendar cycle. A single word spoken during that period brought harsher judgment, sometimes renewed exile, sometimes worse. One peculiar account survives. It tells of a novice priest, still a boy, who sneezed during a critical chant, an involuntary act, but one seen as interruption. He was sentenced to sweep the temple courtyard in complete silence for 260 days, the full turn of the Tanalpwali sacred calendar. His meals were not given, but left behind by those who pitied him. He survived. But he never spoke again, even after the sentence was lifted. It may seem extreme. But to the Aztecs, these laws were not born of cruelty. The temple was not just sacred. It was the navel of the world, the point where the gods had torn themselves open to birth the cosmos. To err within that space was to insult that sacrifice. And the punishment was not vengeance, it was correction. A way to restore balance. And sometimes, punishment was quiet. Not visible. Not remembered in stone or song. Instead, the offender was erased. Their name removed from rolls. Their memory unspoken. It was called spiritual forgetting. To be unnamed was worse than death in a world built on legacy. Ancestors would turn their backs. Descendants would never know the name. You would not simply be gone. You would never have been. You passed the edge of the courtyard now. The torches have guttered low, and shadows pool thick around the bases of the temples. A small group of priests sits beneath the colonnade in silent meditation. Their faces are hidden by hoods, their bodies still, their presence more like stone than flesh. You dare not speak. You dare not move too quickly. You think of the rules, the precise ways of walking, kneeling, breathing. You wonder how many others stumbled, how many vanished, how many were transformed into stories, into warnings, into offerings. But within all of this, there is a logic. A shape. A justice, not rooted in power, but in sacred order. The gods, after all, gave everything so that the world might exist. Their blood poured into the soil. Their hearts fed the stars. The least that mortals could do in return was move carefully, and honor what had been given. You lower your eyes. The stone beneath your feet feels warm, even in the coolness of night. You feel the silence pressing against your skin. Even the dust here seems to shimmer with memory. Even your breath feels borrowed, and so you walk gently. You speak softly, and you do not touch the stones. The path away from the temples winds down through quieter streets. Though your legs ache from the climb and your eyes feel weighted by the hours, the city still has more to whisper before it gives itself fully to sleep. The sacred walls fall behind you, their towering presence fading into the hush of distance. You descend slowly, guided not by signs but by sensation, and the streets begin to narrow. The air becomes softer, thinner, filled with scents that speak of dyes and steam, of cloth and chalk. As you round a bend, the wide thoroughfares give way to slender corridors flanked by clay-tiled workshops and low lanterns. A canal runs beside you, narrow and reflective, its surface breaking the moonlight into drifting shards. The silence here is less solemn than what came before. It is gentler, more intimate. You can feel the pulse of a different kind of life taking over. You have wandered into a strange and sacred quarter. It is not ruled by priests or warriors, nor governed by judges or nobles. Instead, it belongs to the quiet power of craft, fabric, feathers, color. This is the district of the weavers, the dyers, the pattern makers. It is the home of the artisans who paint and stitch the very fabric of identity. Here, people shape meaning from fiber and thread. Their hands do not hold swords or sacred knives, but they wield tools no less sharp. With bone needles, carved spindles, and pots of glimmering pigment. They write the visual language of Tenochtitlan. This is also where another kind of authority resides, the silent stewards of appearance, the watchers of woven truth. In this place, what you wear is not mere decoration. It is testimony. And it can betray you. At first, it seems a strange idea. That cloth could carry consequence. That garments could invite judgment. That a tunic, stitched well and worn with pride, might become a crime. But in this empire, nothing worn is meaningless. Every thread is marked. Every fringe, every color, every cut declares something about its wearer, your lineage, your rights, your station, your story. Clothing is not chosen. It is bestowed. To wear above your station is not aspiration. It is deception. It is a quiet theft. It suggests not ambition, but arrogance. You are not dressing to elevate yourself, but to erase boundaries meant to protect the order of the world. And that order, here, is sacred. Imagine this moment. You are a merchant. Not poor, not noble. You have worked hard, traded well, earned some respect. Your family is comfortable. One season, fortune turns in your favor. You secure a shipment at the right price, you sell early, and you walk away with more cacao beans than expected. You are not rich, but you are content. And on one lazy afternoon, you pass a small dyer's shop and see it, a tunic, finely spun from imported cotton, dyed in a luminous purple that sways in the breeze like twilight-made fabric. You know this color. It is forbidden. Reserved for those of high blood or divine appointment. Yet something in it speaks to you. Just once, you tell yourself. Just for the wedding. Just for a little while. But eyes are everywhere in this city. Someone always sees. The next morning, the world has changed. You are no longer a merchant admired for your luck. You are summoned to the plaza, where people gather in slow curiosity. An official meets you there, his tone without anger, his words without sharpness. There is no need to shout. Your transgression speaks for itself. He asks you to remove the garment. Not everything. Only what is wrong. It is taken from your shoulders carefully, not to shame you but to prove a point. The forbidden tunic is held up for all to see. Its fabric glows in the sun, beautiful and silent. In return, you are handed another tunic. Rough. Sackcloth. Misfit. Chafing. And on its chest, a painted mark, perhaps a crooked tail, a broken arrow, a wide red slash that cannot be mistaken. You wear it, and in doing so, you wear your failure, but that is not the end. You are sentenced to work in the public eye. For days, perhaps weeks, you sweep market squares and scrape temple courtyards. You are watched. You are not beaten. You are not caged. But your pride is unspooled like thread from a torn sleeve. Every step reminds you that here, in this world, status is woven, not claimed. None of this is cruel for cruelty's sake. The Aztecs upheld an exacting system of sumptuary law. It was not only about wealth, but about meaning. Cotton was a privilege. Unless you had earned it or inherited the right, you could not wear it. Dyes were even more tightly bound. Cochineal red came from crushed insects, prized and potent. Purples drawn from shells held ceremonial force. Some colors were tied directly to gods. Some to warriors who had earned their feathers in battle. Even feathers had a language. A quetzal plume was not just rare. It was a sentence carved in color. Only those who had taken a captive in combat could wear such a feather without risking punishment. Necklaces, belts, earrings, and even sandals were coded. In many ceremonies, commoners went barefoot to show humility. To put on sandals at the wrong time was not fashion, it was defiance. Enforcement was not occasional. It was woven into the rhythms of city life. Especially during festivals or religious processions, officials trained in the reading of clothing would move through crowds. Their eyes were sharp. They saw not only the color and cut, but what they represented. If they saw you in a cloak stitched with a forbidden animal, or a pattern meant for warriors, they would act. You could be pulled aside in silence. The correction came swiftly, and not all corrections were so light. A codex tells of a young apprentice in a weaver's house. One day, he found a feathered cloak discarded by a visiting noble. Entranced by its weight, its color, its shimmer, he slipped it over his shoulders and went to a festival. He did not expect to be seen. But he was. He was not executed, but he was punished. He was forced to walk the 4 great causeways of the city, barefoot, carrying the cloak above his head like a banner of shame. At each of the 4 temples, he stopped, knelt, and apologized. By the end of his journey, every district had seen him. His name was remembered. So were the feathers he had worn. Sometimes, the garment itself was sentenced. When a piece of clothing was burned, it was not done with anger. It was done with ceremony. The cloth was placed on a small altar. Around it, incense was lit. Chanting began. The fire was not for destruction, but for cleansing. A lie had been woven into the garment. And that lie had to be erased. In its place, the wearer might be instructed to make another. A tunic of maguey fiber, twisted by hand. The process could take days. It would itch and scratch, but it would be right. You see the marks of all this as you walk. Small symbols painted on doorposts. Stray threads dyed in muted ochre. A folded tunic resting alone on a woven mat, its stripes harsh, unmistakable. A warning, not a product. And you wonder. What did it feel like to wear such a tunic? To feel the scratch of it at your collarbone, the weight of your mistake written in red across your chest. It was not meant to hide you. It was made to show you, yet even here, mercy is not forgotten. The system allowed for grace. A person who came forward early could sometimes avoid public shame. Offerings might be made, a plain garment, a length of earth-dyed thread, a basket of spun cotton left at the temple steps. Mothers might speak on behalf of their children. They might offer their own garments in exchange. The gods sought balance, not vengeance. There are tales, too, of nobles punished for pretending to be lowly. A noble child, caught dressing like a commoner, might be sent to live among them for an entire season. They would eat what was offered, labor under the sun, wear what they were given. They would not be cursed. They would be taught, now, at last, you leave the district behind. The looms are quiet. The dye pots cooled. A breeze moves through tall reeds by the canal, brushing your cloak. You look down. It is plain. Unmarked. It fits. It says exactly what it should, but just for a moment, you wonder. What would it feel like to wear something forbidden? To put on a color no one expects to see on you. To step into a plaza and feel the eyes, the hush, the quiet rupture, then you understand. Clothing here is not comfort. It is not ornament, it is law. The wind begins to rise as you drift into the lower districts of the city, lifting stray bits of dust from the road and tugging gently at the worn fabric of hanging banners. It plays with the edges of reed mats draped over windows and shivers through the thatched rooftops of modest homes, their interiors already swallowed in shadow. The sky above is turning the color of wet slate, and the final traces of twilight have long since slipped away. There is no destination forming clearly in your mind anymore. Your thoughts are untethered, and your steps have lost their sense of direction, but still they continue. Forward becomes your only rhythm, the cobblestones beneath your feet, though uneven and scattered with small debris, retain a faint warmth from the long hours of sunlight. That warmth pulses up through your soles like the last breath of the city, a soft exhale before it yields fully to the hush of night. A dog barks once in the distance, then quiets. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks shut. Each sound is a thread in a larger silence. Then, without noticing exactly when it happened, you realize that you have wandered past the edge of the city proper. The wide stone roads taper into dirt paths, and those paths begin to break apart into foot-worn trails. The symmetry of the city's layout dissolves, replaced by open space and dim outlines of marshland. The buildings grow sparse, scattered in uneven clusters. Windows glow faintly with torchlight or remain entirely dark. There are no crowds here, no painted walls, no bright dyes or sounds of drums. The last temples are far behind you now. This is where the edges of Tenochtitlan begin to blur. Here, the tidy geometry of the capital gives way to something more primal. There are no incense-filled plazas. No hum of trade. No metallic ring of tools shaping gold. No children running through markets clutching roasted maize in their fists. Instead, there is only the scrape of wooden tools meeting damp earth, the rustle of bundled reeds borne across shoulders, and the low, tired murmur of men and women who must rise long before the light returns. Even here, in this more rugged place, the framework of the empire remains fully present, because if you truly belonged in this outer world, your hands would already bear its stains. You would know the rough weight of a shovel, the specific ache that builds deep in your shoulders by the time the sky turns golden. You would not walk with clean palms or a curious gaze. You would already be bent at the waist in the fields. For many who dwell here, arriving was not the outcome of ambition or upward movement. It was not a new beginning. It was not a place chosen. It was a place assigned. It was a sentence. In the Aztec world, labor was more than necessity. It was identity. To work was to participate in the body of the city. It was to move within its breath. To refuse communal labor, whether sweeping the plaza, clearing canals, repairing aqueducts, was more than selfishness. It was considered a form of rebellion. An act of separation. The empire was not built on power alone. It was held together by effort. Every citizen, regardless of origin or station, was expected to offer something. And when you withheld that offering, the city responded. The response was not always loud. Imagine, now, that you are a skilled artisan. You work with fine inlay, crafting smooth mosaics from tiny shells and precious stones. Your hands are known for their steadiness. You are admired for your detail, praised for your artistry. But when the Kalpuli, your neighborhood council, calls for the next day of shared labor, you stay home. You say nothing. You cough once and claim to be unwell. When they call again, you remain silent. The third call comes and goes, and you still do nothing. You think that is the end of it, but then, as the first fingers of morning reach across the rooftops, you hear footsteps. Two figures appear at your door. They do not wear armor. They carry no blades. Their clothing is plain, unadorned. One holds a curled scroll in one hand, worn smooth at the corners. The other bears a staff, painted in ceremonial red with feather bundles near its head. They say your name softly. You are not insulted. You are not shouted at. They speak without anger. You are simply informed. You have been reassigned. The punishment for neglecting civic duty was not always a whip or a fine. It was often relocation. Without protest, without dramatic spectacle, you would be taken from your home and sent far away to the outer zones. Out there, beyond the temples, beyond the markets, were the chinampas, floating fields constructed by hands who knew no rest. Mud and reeds layered over woven roots, suspended atop shallow lake waters. It was brilliant engineering, and brutal work. There, you would become a field laborer. You would plant maize by torchlight. You would dredge muck from narrow canals with your arms submerged to the elbow. You would share food with strangers. You would sleep wherever there was dry space. You would produce, but not partake. Your hands would learn new tasks, not by desire, but by decree. This was not a prison. There were no walls, no chains. But you would not mistake it for freedom. It was exile in motion. Punishment through labor. Reordering through toil. Historians still argue over how long such a sentence lasted. Some believe you could earn a return by meeting quotas or by waiting until your name was crossed from the scroll. Others suggest that your place in the city might be given to someone else. Your dwelling reassigned. Your name removed from local memory. Your voice absent from the rituals and your shadow missing from the neighborhood plaza. Some claim that the people around you were encouraged to forget you. And in time, most did. There were no bars keeping you from walking home. You could leave the chinampa and begin that long journey back. But to return without permission was a second violation. You might be captured. You might be dragged through the streets, not as a criminal, but as a symbol. Some were made examples. They were stripped of dignity, wrapped in coarse garments, forced to crawl on hands and knees beneath the watching eyes of the city. Each carried a burden tied to their failure. Maguey thorns lashed together into cruel bundles to remind them of the pain they had caused others. Stones painted with black ink, marked with their offense. Soil piled high in baskets to echo the labor they had refused. The procession would pause at every major plaza, where elders would speak. Children would recite lessons. The punishment did not destroy the body. It etched itself into the mind of the community. In especially sorrowful cases, a family might mourn the exile as if for the dead. Paper effigies would be shaped and named. Offerings prepared. Flames lit. They would hold mock funerals, performing rites to sever connection. That son, that sister, that uncle, would be considered gone. Not dead in flesh, but absent from life. There were stranger punishments too. In rare instances, the lazy were made leaders, appointed to command groups of other exiles. These workers were given impossible tasks. No tools. No help. No instructions. The leader was accountable for every failure. When things fell apart, as they always did, blame flowed upward. Some of these supposed leaders ended up hauling bricks with their bare hands, their titles as hollow as their pride. You see one of these groups now, in the distance. A torch sputters in the breeze. Weeds are being hacked from a half-drained aqueduct. Mud cakes their knees. One man stands apart. His back is straight, but his words are hoarse. He gives instructions that no one follows. His arms hang loose at his sides. He leads, but no one walks behind him. There is one punishment quieter than all the rest: silence. Some were not sent away. They were not paraded or beaten. They were simply ignored. The public water fountains no longer flowed for them. Firewood stores did not offer them bundles. Their names were left off temple rolls. When festivals arrived, their entrances were barred. When illness came, no one brought herbs. When questions were asked, no one remembered their answers. They became shadows of themselves, still walking among others, but unseen. This was not exile by force. It was exile by absence, and still, there remained a path back. Redemption was not denied to those who truly sought it. A man might work through the night without being asked. A woman might return with baskets of produce for the sick. A young apprentice might carve benches for strangers to rest beneath. If the city accepted the gift, the silence would lift. One by one, old ties would begin to thread together again. There is a story, quiet but remembered, of a man who once refused a single week of labor. He was cast out, made to live on the edge of the Chinampa zone. 3 years later, he returned. He had built a bridge from woven wood and bent vines, laid plank by plank across a deep marsh path. It stood long after his hands had moved on. The city used it without ceremony. The people called it by his name. Not to honor, but to remember. Now, your steps climb a gentle hill. From its crest, you look down across the field of floating gardens. Under the silver light of the moon, the water mirrors the stars above. Reeds sway in the wind. Human figures bend and rise with slow precision. Some came here freely. Others were sent. But all move in the rhythm of something larger. In this world, labor was not merely survival. It was proof. It was the thread that held each life to the next. To work was to belong. To refuse it was to unravel. You pause, watching the wind ripple across the shallows. It carries the smell of earth and still water. A frog croaks once, low and brief, then disappears into silence, and in that silence, something settles within you. Here, failure does not always carry flame or blade. Sometimes, it is softer. Sometimes, it means becoming a name that slowly vanishes, spoken less, then not at all. You wake to the sound of drums in the distance, slow and deliberate, each beat echoing across the quiet hush of dawn like the steady pulse of the city itself. It is not the wild rhythm of war nor the ecstatic burst of a public parade. This is something more restrained, more private. Perhaps another festival day. Or perhaps something else entirely. Something more sacred. You pull yourself up and follow the sound, letting it guide your steps through narrow side streets and shaded alleys still wrapped in the cool mist of morning. The air is tinged with the faint scent of copal smoke and early cooked maize. You walk until the buildings around you begin to thin and soften, their stone edges giving way to the smooth openness of a wide ceremonial plaza. Its edges lined with fluttering banners and reed-draped poles, and there, standing solemnly in the open beneath the pale light of a waking sun, you see them. A group of youths arranged in even rows, their feet bare against the cool earth. Their heads are clean-shaven, their robes simple and coarse against their skin. No jewelry, no paint, no expression except a strange, quiet stillness. Yet within that silence, their faces betray a mixture of emotions. Some show pride, tightly held in clenched jaws and lifted chins. Others seem frightened, eyes flicking anxiously toward the priest at the edge of the square. And some wear both expressions at once, caught in that ancient tension between fear and the desire to prove oneself. They are fasting. They are silent. They do not speak, even to each other, they are waiting to be judged. You have come to the threshold of a powerful ritual, one of the most sacred in Aztec life and belief. This is no simple gathering. It is the rite of transition, the ceremonial initiation of youth into adulthood. A season of tests, of discipline, and above all, of restraint. For here, growing older was not a matter of age alone. It required transformation, guided not just by instruction but by deprivation. At the very center of these rites was a strange command, strange, at least, to modern ears: no salt. No chili, for a set period, sometimes as short as a few days, sometimes stretching into many long months. Those preparing to step into adult roles were forbidden from consuming some of the most basic and beloved elements of Aztec food. Salt and chili, those twin pillars of taste and nourishment, were stripped away. Even sweets made from maize, so common and comforting, were prohibited. The rule was not merely symbolic. It was spiritual, meant to carve self-discipline into the bones of each youth. To abstain from flavor was to cleanse the will. You were not just preparing for adulthood. You were proving yourself worthy of trust, worthy of the immense responsibilities that came with belonging to the community in full, and if you broke the fast, the consequences came quickly and without hesitation. These were not gentle corrections or whispered reprimands. Punishment could be immediate and deeply humiliating. A single lapse might lead to expulsion from the rite altogether. Picture it clearly, your entire family has waited for this moment for years. You have trained, meditated, practiced fasting, made offerings, and worn the same robe for weeks. But then, one night, drawn by hunger and memory, you sneak a taste of salt from the edge of a cooking pot. You think no one sees. But a sibling, dutiful and devout, notices and tells a priest. And with that small act, everything shifts. The ceremony continues, but without you. Those who faltered were marked. Some were made to wear black-streaked garments, visible signs of spiritual failure. Others were denied the tattoos or ritual markings that marked the passage into adulthood. Their bodies continued to grow, but without the signs of acceptance, they remained children in the eyes of the people. Delay, not in time, but in standing. One account recalls a boy caught chewing dried chili seeds during his fast. He was immediately removed from the initiation group and sent to a lakeside shrine, where he spent 3 lunar cycles gutting and cleaning fish. When he returned, he had to begin the entire rite again from the very start, this time with no ceremony, no celebration. And no feast. Scholars still debate whether such exclusions were always permanent or intended as temporary lessons. Some argue that the goal was never lifelong banishment, but rather a pause, a break in the rhythm of transition. Still, the social shame of failure often lingered far beyond the final day of the fast, and this ritual was not simply about personal willpower. To the Aztec people, salt was a symbol of far more than taste. Salt preserved food, healed wounds, cleansed offerings. It was a holy substance, tied to divine forces and sacred cycles. Huixtosehutl, goddess of salt and fertility, governed over it. In denying yourself salt, you denied the core of life's flavor and function. The act was not just physical. It was cosmic. A sacred vow whispered to the gods. I can live without pleasure. I can withstand the absence of power. I am ready. So to break that vow was not merely to cheat on a diet. It was to unravel the sacred balance. As you continue walking, your path takes you past a small shrine, hidden behind a curtain of reeds. There, initiates have left humble offerings, flat stones, bits of feather, dried husks of maize arranged in quiet care. No salt. No bright colors. Just stillness, humility, and clarity. A shallow clay bowl sits at the center of the shrine. You peer inside. It is empty. As it must be, but salt fasting was not only required of individuals. Entire families, at times, were expected to abstain. During mourning, during periods of collective prayer, some communities demanded all members give up salt together. And if even one member broke the ban, the punishment fell on all. Guilt was communal. So too was purification. In a small lakeside village, a peculiar tradition arose. Families who violated the salt rule were made to walk, single file, across a winding marsh path. Each person barefoot. Each blindfolded. And as they walked, they sang a slow, repetitive chant of apology to Huixtosehutl. The walk was long. The path was slippery. Those who fell into the mud had to return to the beginning and start again, their failure marked by silence from the rest of the group, another symbolic response. The cloak of ash. If a young person broke their fast, they might be dressed in a robe smeared with cold ash and forced to sit on the fringes of sacred ceremonies in total silence. They were not jeered or beaten. They were not addressed at all. They were made to watch. To observe what they had once been part of, and to grasp what they had surrendered. Not forever, but for now, and yet, there was a deeper purpose behind the severity. Some who failed found their way back. Redemption was not only allowed. It was built into the rite. The aim of this system was not to destroy the individual but to reshape them, to help them rebuild with greater strength. Through extra labor. Through acts of service. Through offerings, not only to the gods, but to the community that had once embraced them. One tale speaks of a girl who, late one night, secretly ate a salted plum, unable to resist its familiar sting. But rather than hide, she confessed openly and tearfully to the temple priest. In response, she was given a task: weave 4 full cloaks of pure white cotton. The work was slow and demanding. But when she finished, each cloak was presented to the temple as a gift of renewal. She was welcomed back into the rite. She received her tattoo. She was praised, not just for returning, but for telling the truth, because in this culture, honesty mattered as much as restraint. You keep moving through the plaza. The initiates do not shift. Their heads remain bowed beneath wide, woven sun shields. A priest walks among them, scattering incense. At one point, he pauses beside a youth, lifts their chin with a single finger, studies their face, then moves on. No words. No sign of judgment. Not yet, and as you watch, the meaning behind the ritual begins to take shape. These rules and punishments were not designed simply to enforce obedience. They were meant to prepare the individual for the heavier burdens of adulthood. For leadership. For responsibility. For service. To shape a person capable of protecting and sustaining a people, and of honoring the gods in both ceremony and action. Even something as small as salt could become a weight of meaning, because here, seasoning was sacred, and if you could not be trusted to govern your own tongue, then how could the world ever trust your hands? You have spent so much of this long and winding night among farmers and merchants, among quiet priests and louder wrongdoers, stepping through the margins of their lives and listening to their stories whispered in smoke and shadows. But now, something in the air shifts. The rhythm beneath your feet changes. It begins subtly, almost unnoticed, until the drums that once lulled and softened your steps now grow louder, rising in urgency. Their beat no longer soothes. It summons. It presses inward. The pulse of the city is no longer a background murmur. It becomes a force that draws you forward. The scent of copal thickens, growing richer and more intoxicating with every breath. Its sweetness curls through the air like silk unraveling in slow spirals, draping the torchlit corridors in a heady perfume that clings to your skin. You follow it as though led by an unseen thread. The stone paths open suddenly before you, and you realize you have reached the edge of something entirely different. The mood sharpens. The space breathes. You stand now at the boundary of the ceremonial arena. It spreads out before you, vast and circular, as if the world has paused here to make space for something sacred. Its borders are marked by tall, tapering banners that ripple softly in the wind. Their fabric catches the torchlight, fluttering like the breath of spirits, each movement a reminder of presence unseen. The firelight dances across the painted stones in gold and blood-red glows, sending shadows across the ground that leap and twist like ancestors returned for a final blessing or farewell. At the arena's very center, a lone figure moves with intention. Each step he takes is deliberate. Not hurried, not hesitant. Measured. Weighted with meaning. He does not flinch, even as the eyes of the crowd begin to gather upon him like coals growing hot. His limbs are painted in thick, black lines that crisscross his skin, markings that speak of rank, of capture, and of the journey to come. His chest is bare, the skin gleaming in the fire's glow, but his back remains upright. His shoulders are steady. His breathing is calm. Something in his presence feels larger than the body it inhabits, as though the man and the role he plays have merged. He is not a criminal. At least, not in the sense most would understand. Not yet. But he is also no longer free. He stands between roles, held within the tension of transformation. He is a prisoner of war. And the justice awaiting him will not be quiet, nor cloaked behind stone walls. It will not take the shape of chains or silence. His fate is to be witnessed. To be remembered. You have entered one of the most intricate, contradictory, and haunting expressions of Aztec law and custom, the realm of ritual justice as it was enacted upon the captured. Not all who were taken in battle were offered immediately to the gods. Some were chosen for a longer path. They were not granted clemency out of compassion, but preserved for another purpose. Their lives were extended. Their bodies readied. Their endings were shaped into spectacle. These captives were woven into the very fabric of spiritual celebration. They became dancers. They became actors. They became living symbols, made to wear the faces of gods, to carry stories upon their skin and bones. In elaborate rites, they reenacted conflicts they had already lost, stepping once more into the center of the fight. And the people watched. The gods watched. Imagine the moment of capture. Perhaps you were once a jaguar knight, fierce and agile, your body cloaked in spotted pelts. Or an eagle warrior, crowned with a beaked helm, your eyes narrowed with pride and purpose. You battled with brilliance. But in the end, you were overcome. Bound tightly, with rope or vine, you were led across strange roads to the very heart of the empire. There, the streets filled with faces. The drums called out. You were paraded not as a shameful captive, but as a marked figure of importance. You were fed generous meals. You were bathed in clean water. Your skin was anointed. You were given garments embroidered with meaning. You were permitted shade from the sun. All of it felt like a strange kind of honor, but it was not honor in the way most would understand. It was ceremony. It was preparation. Historians still debate the full sequence of what happened next, for the records come from many hands and hold many tones. One rite, however, is well described. The great festival of Tlekaxipulistli. The season of renewal through flaying. Those chosen for this festival were given time. Days, even weeks. Not to mourn. Not to resist. But to prepare. They learned ritual dances, memorized sacred chants, rehearsed movements that were both graceful and grave. They were clothed in elaborate garments, robes stitched with meaning, adorned in the precise colors and markings of gods. Each choice, from feather to stripe, held sacred significance. It was not costuming. It was invocation. Their very appearance called divine presence into the space. And then, the final performance. The arena would fill. The people would gather. The drumbeat would thunder. The prisoner would be led to the center of the circular stone. Sometimes, their ankle was bound by rope to fix their range. Sometimes, they held a weapon, but not a real one. A wooden club decorated with feathers, lacking the sharp obsidian edges. Their opponent, an Aztec warrior fully armed, approached with authority, bearing the weight of duty. This was not mere combat. It was ritual enactment. And everyone watched. This was justice shaped into myth. It did not shrink from spectacle. It embraced it. In the eyes of the gods, courage mattered more than conquest. A captive who fought bravely. Who did not plead, who did not run, who did not fall with trembling knees, earned a kind of transcendence. If the death came without dishonor, it became a gateway, not an ending. There is one tale often told. A king, captured in war. Not a soldier, but a sovereign. He was brought to the capital and given 40 full days. 40 days of dignity. Of ritual. Of sleep upon woven mats. Of speech and prayer. Of final offerings and chosen companions. On the last morning, he rose. Barefoot, silent, he walked to the stone. No words. No resistance. When the blade came down, it met no fear. Only stillness. And when his people heard, they believed he had become a star, set a light in the heavens to guide them in the dark. Not all who stood in that circle were enemies from distant lands. Some were once members of the community. Citizens who had broken its deepest codes. Rapists. Blasphemers. Those whose crimes were judged beyond forgiveness. For them, death was not given in the shadows. It was brought into the sun. The punishment was transformed into performance. The sentence became ceremony. And in the most astonishing turn of all, some who entered the arena came by choice. Devout souls who volunteered to embody a god for a day or a season. They were not condemned, but chosen. They took on the names of divine beings. Their deaths were rehearsed with sacred timing. Their final hours unfolded in music and incense, in petals and poetry. They bore the unbearable burden of divine presence. Their task was not repentance. It was representation. You lift your gaze now to the center of the arena. The man is still there. His arms are raised wide, feathers trailing behind him like wings unfurled. His face is painted in deep reds and glowing golds. Not the flames themselves, but the symbols of flame. Abstract and powerful. The essence of fire captured in line and form. Before him stands the warrior in jaguar skins, weapon gleaming with obsidian. The two lock eyes, the drums still. The hush falls deep, no words are exchanged, then comes the first movement. What follows is not a brawl. It is poetry cast in flesh and motion. Each pivot, each advance, each retreat, carries the grace of ritual. The prisoner nearly stumbles but recovers. The crowd inhales together. A blow glances past. The people exhale. It is not chaos. It is choreography. And when the final strike lands, it is not a moment of brutality. It is a moment of surrender. The prisoner breathes once more. Tilts his head upward. His neck, offered, the blade falls. It is swift. This is not an act of revenge. This is the rebalancing of the world. Silence follows. The kind that echoes. The body is laid upon a woven litter, dressed with marigolds and cacao pods. The heart, still warm, is lifted high by the priests. A gift for the sun. A nourishment for the heavens. His name is spoken aloud. It will be remembered. This death is not an erasure. It is a passage. You linger near the edge of the stone circle. Priests move with slow purpose, gathering what remains. Broken feathers. Scattered petals. Bowls of bitter cacao tipped on their sides. Children press close. Wide-eyed. Open-mouthed. They do not cry out. They do not flinch. You expected horror. Instead, you find reverence, because here, punishment does not always mean correction. Sometimes, it means transformation. Sometimes, it means ascension. Even those condemned may rise. They become stories. They become symbols. They become the heat that fuels the sun, the memory that stirs the wind, for in the Aztec vision of the world, the gods once offered all they had. Their blood. Their breath. Their very being, torn apart to give this world form. And so, the highest punishment, the deepest loss, the most final of ends, is also the most sacred of all, and if you meet it with grace, you do not leave as a failure, you leave as a legend. You walk slowly now, each step taken with more caution than the last, your pace no longer dictated by direction, but by the weight of everything you've just witnessed. The air still hums with the echo of drumbeats that once thundered like a heartbeat across the arena. The image of a man's final breath, exhaled without protest, still lingers at the edge of your mind. The ceremonial plaza lies behind you, no longer alive with music or fire, its brilliance extinguished, its purpose fulfilled. Yet something stays with you. Not the scent of smoke. Not the tang of blood. Something more elusive, more persistent. A presence, almost invisible, that clings to your skin like dust and whispers across your shoulders like the tail end of a sacred chant unfinished. You cross a narrow bridge of stone, the surface darkened by dew and slick with the shine of early condensation. The worn path beneath your feet speaks of age and repetition, smoothed by the passage of thousands. Each step echoes softly. On the other side lies a district quieter, dimmer, tucked away from the brilliance of temples and the clamor of main plazas. Here, the torches burn low, flickering gently in carved brackets. The light they cast is weak and unsteady, their flames dancing like shadows afraid of being seen. The walls here are lined with murals, but most have faded with time. Some seem to have surrendered to rain and sun, their once bold colors now worn to whispers of pigment. Others appear to have been purposefully scrubbed away, scraped and wiped, as if someone had tried to forget what they once declared. You feel this place breathing in its own rhythm, subdued and forgotten, a part of the city that has been allowed to decay quietly, without ceremony or witness. And it is here, in this hushed and overlooked corner of Tenochtitlan, that you first hear the story. Not told by a noble. Not taught by a priest. Not presented in any official manner. It arrives instead like a secret passed from hand to hand in the dark. Like a rumor too fragile for the open air, too sacred to risk distortion. You hear it not as history, but as something older, more intimate. A truth cloaked in uncertainty. Two older women sit near a courtyard oven, their bodies wrapped in simple cloth, their faces lined with age and quiet understanding. Their hands move steadily, rhythmically, grinding maize into flour with the patience of those who have done it since youth. The white powder clings to their fingers, rising in thin clouds with each motion. Their voices are low, barely audible, intended for no one but themselves. But still you hear. Still the story finds you. He left with a face, one of them murmurs, her tone flat but firm, and came back with only silence. The man they speak of was once a priest. Not merely a servant of the gods, but a prodigy within the temple of Tezcatlipoca. He had the bearing of someone destined to rise, young and eloquent, his every word wrapped in purpose, his eyes always turned upward toward the stars. He could read dreams as though they were glyphs written in smoke. People came to him not just for guidance, but for comfort, bringing their worries like small, broken birds. And he would mend them with chant, with gaze, with presence. Then, one day, he vanished. There was no ceremony. No departure ritual. No explanation offered to the public or whispered behind temple walls. He was simply gone. Some believed he had embarked on a pilgrimage, a solitary journey into the mountains to commune with something older than even the gods. Others claimed he had been sent to an oracle far to the east, beyond the lakes, past the lands where the maize grows thin. But other whispers told a different tale. A tale of broken vows. Of a forbidden text touched by mortal fingers. Of a word spoken when silence was sacred. Of a love born in the shadows, where none was allowed. The truth remains lost, if it was ever known at all. What was known, what was undeniable, was that after a full cycle of seasons, he returned, but the man who came back was not the one who had left. His robes were gone. The regalia of his priesthood no longer adorned his form. He carried no staff, wore no headdress, bore no jewelry to signify station. His eyes had dimmed. His voice had vanished. And where his nose had once been, there was now only smooth, flat skin. Not jagged, not torn, not the work of rage or violence. It had been removed with precision. With ceremony. With purpose. His face, once proud and expressive, now wore an eerie neutrality. A void, etched cleanly where scent and breath and spirit once found their path. The story has many versions. Scholars debate whether it was literal or metaphor. Whether his nose was removed as penance for arrogance, for reaching beyond what was permitted, for interpreting dreams that were meant to remain unread. Others believe the act was symbolic, a ritual erasure of the very faculty that connected him to the gods, to incense, to visions. It was not an execution. He was not cast out. Instead, he was allowed to stay. And this, some say, was the cruelest justice of all. He remained always nearby. Each day he would sit just outside the temple gates, not inside where he once walked with pride, but never far enough to be forgotten. He wove mats from reeds with slow, deliberate care. He never raised his gaze. Never acknowledged passers-by. People sometimes left him small objects, tokens not of charity, but of meaning. Obsidian flakes. Bits of crushed marigold. Braids of dried herbs. He never took them. Never refused them either. Children, emboldened by curiosity or dared by their friends, would creep close and whisper questions. But no answers came. One version of the tale, rarely spoken above a hush, claims that his severed nose was not discarded. It was preserved in a small, sealed clay vessel, buried beneath the altar where he once prayed. As though the gods had claimed it, demanded it, and could not allow its return. As though his connection to the divine was too volatile to leave untethered, to the people of Tenochtitlan, the nose was not simply flesh. It was scent, the bridge to the world of flowers and wind and smoke. It was intuition. To lose it was to lose orientation in the sensory world. A mutilation not of vanity, but of being. A punishment that reached far deeper than bone, yet this was not a horror story for all who told it. Some viewed it as grace in disguise. Because he lived. His blood was not spilled in sacrifice. His heart was not torn from his chest. Instead, his punishment continued each day, as the life he had once known was unraveled, strand by strand. He became a living memory, a glyph in the flesh, a lesson etched not in books or stone, but in silence and in skin. The other priests passed him daily. None bowed. None spoke. But each one looked. Their glances were brief, but never accidental. Their acknowledgement, cold as it was, formed part of the ritual. A wordless decree that this man had transgressed. And had been transformed. Such is the nature of Aztec justice. Not always meant to erase, but to reveal. Not to remove, but to remake. When sacred law was broken, the body could be marked in place of scrolls. Flesh could become message. A reminder to all who passed, and as you pass now, near the steps of the same temple, your eyes are drawn to a fading mural. The paint is cracked, nearly gone. But a face remains faintly visible. And within that face, a void. Where the nose should have been, there is only absence. Whether that part of the mural ever existed at all, or whether it was removed, no one can say. Perhaps the tale shaped the image. Perhaps the image birthed the tale. No one dares repaint it. It survives not by being protected, but by being feared, and now, without meaning to, you carry the story with you. It has settled in your thoughts. In your breath. You did not ask for it. You were not chosen to receive it. But still, it is yours now. In the Aztec world, justice took many forms. Not all were violent. Not all came with ceremony. Sometimes, it wore the mask of quiet. Sometimes, it arrived not as a roar, but as a hush. Not in what could be heard, but in what could no longer be smelled, and that absence was its own kind of permanence. The night air has grown colder, the wind sharpening just slightly, curling through the spaces between stones and against the corners of buildings. It whispers along the edges of walls, slides beneath eaves, and flicks through reeds that rise from darkened canals. But you hardly notice it anymore. Your skin no longer flinches. The cold seems distant, irrelevant, compared to the weight pressing on your thoughts. It is not discomfort that grips you now, but something heavier and deeper. Each story you have heard, each vision you have witnessed, has settled deep within you. They do not pass through like a passing chill. They stay. Heavy, unmoving, like small carved stones collecting in your chest. Their weight presses inward, compacting against your lungs, slowing your breath. You walk now without any real direction. There is no plan. No chosen path. Your feet carry you forward with no destination in mind, guided only by the pull of curiosity and by a quiet, persistent awareness that something remains. Something has not yet revealed itself. Somewhere out there, beyond the alleys and canals and low stone walls, waits the most elaborate punishment of all, and then, like a thread pulling taut, you hear it, a rhythm, not the kind of rhythm tied to sacrifice. It does not carry the grim certainty of the ceremonial drums that pound like heartbeats into the bones of the plaza. Nor is it like the lilting joy of festival flutes that flutter above colorful crowds, rising like birds. This sound is different. It is measured, but strange. Intentional, but unfamiliar. It loops, undulating like a tide that refuses to rise too high or fall too low. It has a discipline to it, yet resists predictability. It is not for pleasure. It is not for worship, it sounds like dancing. You follow the sound, each step quieter than the last. You round a corner, your shadow flickering against the wall, and find yourself standing at the edge of a brightly lit plaza. Light floods the space from tall stands of burning torches, their flames twisting in columns of gold and smoke. The torches crackle softly, releasing trails of scent into the sky. Flowers have been scattered across the stone ground in intricate spirals and patterns. Petals in red, yellow, and blue create swirling shapes that feel sacred, mathematical, deliberate. Every placement seems intentional, as though even the blossoms must obey the rhythm. Dozens of people are gathered in silence, arranged in wide, concentric circles around a central figure. All eyes are fixed on him. He moves alone in the center, his body swaying and stepping in time with the rhythm. He is clothed in layers of feathered fabric that catch the firelight and shimmer like water. A crown made of gold-stiffened reeds trembles with each motion, balanced carefully on his brow. His arms sweep outward in wide arcs, then curl inward toward his chest, again and again, over and over, tracing a ritualized pattern. His hands draw symbols into the air that seem to echo long after his fingers have passed. The movement is beautiful. It is exact. It is exhausting to watch. He is not smiling, but he is not in pain either. Not yet, because this is no celebration. This is not a festival. The silence of the crowd, the discipline of the movement, the lack of music beyond that single rhythm tells you what this really is. This is a punishment. In the Aztec world, justice was never only about pain or separation. It was rarely simple. There existed a category of punishment that did not fit neatly into battle or sacrifice, exile or forced labor. It lived between those lines. A sentence that was neither wholly death nor entirely life. It was a form of ritual execution performed through art, through theater, through motion. A kind of symbolic death in which the condemned would not be dragged to an altar but instead would be required to perform a story. Step by step. Movement by movement. Before an audience who would bear witness to their final chapter, this man before you, dancing slowly in the light of so many flames, might have been anyone. Perhaps he was a priest who failed his sacred vows. Perhaps he was a noble who conspired in secret against the rule of the empire. Or perhaps he was a merchant who broke a sacred oath, lying when he should have spoken truth. Whatever his crime, the court chose this path. A sentence more elaborate, more theatrical, more unforgettable than any blade or spear. He has not been sentenced to death by force, he has been sentenced to become the very myth he transgressed. The Aztecs were masters of symbolic justice, blending narrative and punishment into something inseparable. In these rare, elaborate executions, the condemned would be assigned a specific mythic role, a god, an animal, a legendary figure from the sacred histories. The choice was always tied to the nature of the sin. The performance was not random. It was corrective. The wrongdoer would be trained, costumed, and prepared to embody the very story their actions had disrupted. Take, for example, the case of a known thief who was sentenced to portray Huhukoyatl, the coyote god of mischief and deception. He danced through the marketplace for an entire day, singing riddles and mimicking trickery. He played his part to the letter, laughter following his steps. But at dusk, masked dancers dressed as stars emerged. They wrapped him in painted ropes, binding him as if in a net, and then silently strangled him behind a curtain of feathers. Or consider the story of a corrupt official who was ordered to take on the role of a fallen feathered serpent. He climbed a wooden tower built just for the occasion, dancing upward in slow spirals while the crowd chanted beneath him. At the top, he leapt, arms spread like wings, into a bed of sharpened obsidian shards. No one cheered. Instead, they closed their eyes and prayed. Historians continue to argue over the frequency of such punishments. Some claim they were rare, reserved for special occasions when myth and justice were allowed to intertwine. Others suggest they occurred more often in outlying courts, where local rulers wanted judgment to feel sacred and moral, not only legal. What little evidence remains agrees on one point: these performances were carefully scripted. They were not improvised. They were not optional. The condemned had to rehearse. They had to learn the steps, memorize the story, and embody it to its end. They had to die with precision. The crowd gathered around you now remains perfectly still. No one speaks. No one shifts. No one breathes too loudly. All attention is focused on the dancer. His steps have begun to slow. Not from hesitation, but from weight. On his back is a large fan made of feathers and woven bone, arcing upward like a winged halo. With each turn he makes, it grows heavier. You can almost see the strain in his shoulders, the trembling of his legs. His feet land slightly uneven now. His hands do not extend as far as before. This is not punishment through pain alone. It is punishment through exhaustion. Through ritual weariness. Through the grinding down of self beneath sacred performance. Every step closer to collapse is a step deeper into the sentence. When he stumbles, the crowd leans forward as one. When he straightens again, a breath escapes the entire plaza. The performance may continue for hours. No one will interfere. No one will hasten the end, but when he falls completely, when his body no longer rises, the priests will step forward, and the final act will begin. There is a strange and faded account from a provincial codex, deep in the archives of a distant town. It describes a dancer condemned to portray Xiaotl, the fire god. He was wrapped in cloth dyed crimson, his arms bearing clay bowls filled with hot coals. He spun in circles beneath the sun, chanting a hymn to light. The punishment was not complete until he dropped the embers. And when that happened, the priests approached. The coals were pressed to his skin, not in hatred, but as the last line of a performance fulfilled. Some believe these punishments were not just justice, but healing. A ritual not for the condemned, but for the people. A symbolic restoration of balance between the gods and the world. Others argue they were just executions made more tolerable, disguised with beauty and movement. But one truth persists: the Aztecs did not see justice as a set of balances or scales. Not in the way others did. They saw it as a story. If you broke the harmony of the world, the best way to restore it was not to erase you, it was to turn you into a story no one would forget. Now, the dancer in the plaza has fallen to his knees. The heavy fan on his back quivers with each breath. His body rocks slightly, still trying to complete the movement. His fingers twitch as if holding on to rhythm, even now. Two robed attendants begin to move. One carries a staff, carved with the spots of a jaguar. The other holds a long black sash in both hands. No one speaks. No one cries out. But the silence itself seems to deepen. It settles over the plaza like a blanket. You feel it press against your chest. The man lifts his face to the sky. His eyes reflect the firelight, and the story ends. You turn away slowly. Your throat tightens. Your breath comes shallow. But it is not fear that moves you, it is reverence, because here, in this city of stone and smoke, death is not always punishment. Sometimes, it is a performance, and the stage is eternal. The stars have shifted above you, tilting just slightly in their endless rhythm, as though realigning with quiet purpose, nudging the final chapter into its rightful place. You feel the change not only in the sky but in your very body. It hums beneath your skin like a quiet chord. There is a heaviness now, not the heaviness of fatigue or fear, but of understanding. Of too many truths laid one atop the other, like ceremonial cloth soaked through with centuries. The stories you've gathered pressed gently against your ribs, each one still echoing, each one still alive. And yet, despite all that has come before, one tale remains. It waits quietly, just beyond the edge of what has already been told. It is not a story of shame. It does not end in silence or in the roaring finality of fire, no. This one ends in ascension, because within the intricate, often unforgiving world of the Aztec, not all punishments were designed to diminish. Some, curiously enough, were meant to elevate. Strange though it sounds, there were paths through which the condemned did not descend into disgrace, but rose into something higher. Into myth. Into divinity. You find yourself stepping softly into a new space, a quiet plaza sheltered in shadow and moonlight. The air is still. Your footsteps echo faintly. The plaza is nearly empty, its silence profound. At its center stands a single stone platform. Weathered by time, unmoved by centuries. Around it, four slender poles reach upward like motionless sentinels. Each is wrapped in faded banners that flutter gently in the night breeze, whispering to no one. The scent of marigolds lingers faintly in the air, the ghost of ceremony long past. There is no blood here. No music. Only a silence so deep it feels almost alive. This was once a place where punishment became transformation. It is difficult to grasp, maybe even poetic in its contradiction, but the Aztecs held a belief that certain punishments could transcend correction. That some sentences, delivered by priest or ruler, could serve not only to balance the scales of justice, but to forge a bridge between human failure and divine purpose. Those chosen for such fates were not saints. They were often captives, lawbreakers, or enemies of the empire. But instead of being forgotten or erased, they were given the chance, through ritual, through sacrifice, to become something eternal. The most well-known example of this strange and solemn transformation comes from the grand festival of Tlacaxaquilistli. Each year, a captive was chosen not to be killed outright, but to become the living embodiment of Tezcatlipoca, the formidable god of night, fate, and hidden truths. Once selected, the condemned was no longer treated as a man. For one entire sacred year, he was Tezcatlipoca. He was dressed in the finest garments, his limbs adorned with golden jewelry. Sacred necklaces graced his chest, and precious feathers crowned his brow. He was fed the richest foods, taught songs reserved only for the most sacred rituals. Wherever he walked, people bowed. Children placed offerings at his feet. He was honored, revered, celebrated. The illusion of divinity was complete, but it was never real. He lived each day knowing how it would end. From the moment of his selection, the clock began ticking toward a single, final moment. At the end of the festival, he would be led through the streets without ceremony. His robes would be removed. His jewels taken away. His path would end at the temple, where he would kneel and offer his heart, not as a prisoner, but as a god returning to the heavens. There is still debate over how these chosen figures were selected. Some sources suggest they volunteered, preferring a year of splendor to a moment of agony. Others claim priests chose them by sign or omen, marking them as destined for this sacred mimicry. Still others believe condemned men were assigned their roles as a final sentence of strange mercy. Regardless of origin, the purpose was clear, not to erase the wrong, but to repurpose it. To burn the memory of crime into a new shape, one sanctified by ritual, and this strange path was not reserved for men alone. In certain regions, when a woman transgressed the laws of fertility or midwifery, laws held with deep reverence, she could be chosen to embody the goddess Siwakotl. For a full moon cycle, she would live in a secluded chamber, wrapped in ceremonial cloth, tended to by women of the temple. No one was permitted to speak her name aloud. At the height of the cycle, she would emerge to walk barefoot through the city, crying aloud in ritual mourning for lost warriors and stillborn children. Her voice echoed through streets and alleys, raw and haunting. Then, she vanished. No record remains of what happened after. Some accounts say she was quietly executed, her role complete. Others suggest she was taken to a distant sanctuary, her identity dissolved into silence. And some, whispering half-truths from the edges of memory, claim she became the goddess herself. Absorbed into divinity by the power of ritual, even among the lower classes, there were echoes of this strange ascension. An old tale survives, weathered like the corners of a forgotten codex. A man, caught stealing from a war shrine, stood accused of desecration, a crime punishable by swift death. But when he was questioned, he told of a dream. A vision in which the god of fire called to him, demanding an offering. The priests doubted him. They tested him. They watched. And in the end, they believed, his sentence was not execution. It was pilgrimage. He was ordered to carry a sacred flame from the capital city to a far volcano. He walked without shoes. He did not eat. He was watched over by guards who never spoke. For 5 nights and 5 days, he walked. When he reached the volcano, he climbed alone. No one ever saw him descend. Some say he leapt into the crater, offering his body to the flame. Others believe he vanished in smoke. But back in the city, a clay tablet was inscribed with his name. Not as a thief. As a servant of divine fire. This is the quiet brilliance of Aztec justice. It was not always about destruction. It was not always about fear. Within its harsh lines and uncompromising rituals, there flickered a narrow but radiant space where meaning could replace erasure. Where punishment could become purpose. Where the final chapter could still be sacred. You sit now at the edge of this forgotten plaza. The banners above stir again, moved by the same wind that brushes your face. The stone platform gleams like a memory in the silver wash of starlight. No one stands upon it now. And yet you feel a presence. You feel the echo of movement. You feel the trace of stories told not with words, but with breath, and blood, and reverence. You ask yourself, in the hush between wind and stone, what it might have meant to walk such a path. To live your final days not with dread, but with purpose. To rise, not to escape your fate, but to fulfill it. To step willingly into legend. And maybe, just maybe, that is the last lesson buried deep within this ancient, brutal, beautiful logic, that punishment, in the eyes of the Aztec, was not always a sentence of suffering. Sometimes, it was an invitation, a chance to return to the great pattern not through destruction, but through transformation. Not every condemned soul was forgotten. Some became stars, scattered across the sky. Some became songs, sung in the language of memory. Some became the wind that circles this place even now, whispering truths older than any name, and some, perhaps, are still watching. Now, let yourself exhale. Not all at once. Not in a rush. Just slowly. Like a sigh stretched across centuries. Let it pass through your chest like wine through tall grass, unhurried, ancient, steady, the torches have burned low and died. Their last embers are only memory now. The drums that once pounded like hearts have gone quiet. The feathers lie motionless, the paint has vanished from the faces it once adorned. The plaza stands still beneath the stars, empty of spectacle, empty of ceremony. The temples no longer watch you. The gods have turned inward. You are not a witness now. You are simply a traveler. A soul who crossed into a city of stories carved in stone and smoke. A guest to a justice both magnificent and merciless. You feel the coolness settle in, gentle at first, then deeper. It fills the air around you, slips beneath your skin. The kind of silence that follows ritual. That lingers after fire. That blooms in the wake of stories too wide to carry home. Tonight, you wandered a world where punishment was painted, danced, and worn. A place where justice was not balanced on scales, but written in rhythm. A single mistake could become a myth. A lie could be answered with silence. A crime could end not with erasure, but remembrance. You saw a child cough on smoke meant to cleanse. A thief walk cloaked in feathers. A liar whose voice was taken away. A priest who returned marked forever. A dancer who moved until nothing was left but breath and ashes, and still, through all the darkness, there was meaning, there was order, there was, in its own strange and solemn way, a sense of balance. So now, let your breath fall gently. Let your thoughts settle like dust. Let the stones of your mind grow still. There are no drums here, no torches, no voices raised in prayer or punishment, only the soft, slow hush of history folding itself into sleep. The gods have had their fill tonight, and you have walked among shadows, you have seen the line where punishment and beauty meet. Now, let it fall behind you, let it drift away, let it fade like mist, let it go.